Hello and welcome to Varn Vlog, not Darn Vlog. I'm gonna keep that in.
That darn vlog, he's at it again.
Yeah, and we're talking with Henry or Henri, who I know from a couple of different things. But today we're talking about France Unbowed and the difference between what's going on there in France, what has gone on with other European left populist movements like Podemos and Syriza, both now over a decade old, and the differences between them and France Unbowed, and the differences between France Unbowed and the democratic socialist movement here in America, since they have had let's say, the beginnings of a possible electoral victory in New York at the time of this recording, which is in July of 2025. Hi, Henry. Let's talk about France Unbowed a bit. What is it? Weirdly, of the European left populist movements, it seems to be A, one of the biggest, and B, one of the least talked about in the United States.
Well, Derick, I want to thank you for having me on your show so graciously to talk about France Unbowed, as well as just the radical left, as you said, across the world. The way I would think about the France Unbowed is to contextualize it in a sort of broader emergence of, let's put it in American terms of like post-Occupy electoral politics on the left, right? And we've seen, as you mentioned, there's been Syriza, Podemos, Die Linke, there's DSA, there's all these different things. I think what makes the Unbowed stand out is there's a particular theory that guides what they're doing. There's a particular form of organization, and there's a particular strategy. Now, all of these three things go together, obviously. I think they make sense the most together, but they can be separated, and we should probably, go through them one by one. But to put it briefly, I would say the biggest difference between something like DSA and the France Unbowed is going to come down to these 3 points.
So to ask a little bit of a clarifying question, France Unbowed had a really big moment last year. Unfortunately, Macron kind of out-parliamentaried them because of the nature of the French Constitution. And yet it hasn't suffered from the same kind of deflation that a lot of these other left populist movements did. So I think it's interesting that it does have a specific theory, a specific strategy, and a specific organizational form. And its theory doesn't seem to be the same as the theory operating under Podemos and Syriza, and maybe even Die Linke until relatively recently, which seem to be, broadly speaking, more of a condensation of a bunch of left populist theories from the late 1990s and early aughts, as seen through a kind of post-Occupy, post-Arab Spring lens. France Unbowed does seem to be doing something different, even theoretically. So can you talk about how it is not the same as the other forms of European left populism that emerged out of Occupy?
Yeah, so I can go through this relatively quickly if you want. I think, first of all, the France Unbowed would not want to call themselves populist or left populist. And part of that is about the sort of framing of the movement and how it's all built in terms of its ideology, so to speak. The idea of the Unbowed is basically, I'll just go through the 3 points if you want, and then we can talk about how they're different. So when it comes to what are we talking about? Well, the Unbowed started in 2016 around basically the person of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who was, multiple times run for president of the country. And the idea in the French left for a long time had been that the current constitution of the Fifth Republic is just fundamentally busted. It's undemocratic. There's all kinds of problems with it. And for a more radical section of the French left, in order to overcome that, there needs to be some kind of institutional change with the Constitution. We can't just simply, elect a good slate of candidates and have them do a good program given the situation as it is. There has to be actual institutional change. And that's what makes it more radical than something like, I don't know, just your run-of-the-mill progressive electoral force that wants to do like Keynesian economics. Do you see what I mean? There's a fundamental. I think people like the Marxist Unity Group and DSA have a similar observation about the U.S. Constitution, which is that it's busted in such a fundamental way that any kind of pro-social, liberatory, pro-revolutionary movement would need to overcome that impasse. So there's been this sort of gurgling on the French left for a long time. We can see that there have been a lot of social movements in France through the 1990s and 2000s. There were big strikes in 1995. There were basically periodic, like 2006, 2008, uprisings. We had the Yellow Vest recently. We had the movement against retirement reform. So neoliberalism in France has always been kind of a troubled story, where there's been more resistance to it vis-a-vis other countries. And like at the turn of the millennium, when we had the quote unquote plural left government, we got a reduction of working hours to 35 per week, which was unusual. And I don't think any other European country did that. So there's an ability for like Trotskyist candidates at certain points to come together and get like 10% of the presidential vote altogether, right? So there's more of a left energy in France in general. That's like a baseline. Moving from that, the sort of strategy was to look at, well, what's common to all of these Occupy, Arab Spring, the different events going on in the world? What brings them all together? And sort of Mélenchon, the people around him, realized that there were common features and that there was a sort of new change in the material conditions of our time, such that the theories of 100 years ago no longer really apply because capital has changed, human society has changed, and there are new features. There's a new historical materialist theory being developed that has to be attended to. Does that make sense on the sort of theoretical ground level? Or do I know more about that?
Well, what are some of these major changes? Like,
one of them would be population. Like human population doubled basically in the 20th century. It doubled twice, I think. So that is unheard of. It's unheard of in the history of humanity. Like, think about it anthropologically, right? That's just never occurred in the history of the human species. In the 21st century, the human species became majority urban. In 2008 was the tipping point for that. And that brings with it, along with the history of industrial capitalism. I'm sure I don't need to repeat for your audience what is like ecocide and climate change, but all of these things come together to create a particular condition of contemporary life where we are all completely dependent on these networks. Capitalism has become fully networked, or as we say in French, there's a tributary capitalism. We are fully dependent on, I need to go turn on the tap to get water. I don't have a well. I have to go to the supermarket to get food. I don't have goats. Nobody is really autarkic anymore, not even people that live in the countryside. Even people live in the countryside, they have AC, they have indoor plumbing, you know what I mean? They have the electricity. They're dependent on these things. And all of these, networks that maintain and sustain our lives are threatened by climate change. So there's actually a new general interest produced globally, because obviously climate change as a global problem cannot be addressed only in one country or one city. You see what I mean? So there's actually more than just, France has this particular political configuration. The theory is that we've entered into a new historical era called the People's Era. And in this People's Era, we're for the first time an urbanized, interconnected world. And you can see that even with like the expansion of the internet. I posted on Twitter the other day a map of like 10 year, like 2000, I think it was 2012 versus 2022, who has internet access. And that's a whole revolution right there. All of these movements, like in Egypt, what were they using to organize? WhatsApp. In the Yellow Vest, what were they using to organize? Like WhatsApp, Telegram. All these apps actually have a very critical role in the development of uprisings, revolutions, whatever you want to call them. And beyond just the apps and like the information age and all that stuff, the way capital works today is different than it was 150 years ago. We're not talking about the point of production anymore so much as networks of flux of commodities and the workers who have the most leverage are the workers in those logistical sectors, right? It's the truck drivers who are coming around and passing messages when the internet gets shut down to the different, assemblies or the different occupations and stuff like that. It's the dock workers in Marseille who are able to shut down the shipment of arms to Israel, right? And I think all of these things come together, and it's not like the Unbowed are the only people thinking this through. Lots of people have attempted to theorize the 21st century, but when I go back and reread my endnotes and different stuff like that, I just don't come up with a comprehensive program or like concrete proposal for really what to do in the same way. Because this theory, if you think about it, what does it lead to? Inexorably, it leads to a conflict between those who need access to the networks and those who pretend or really do own and control them. Right? That's the real conflict. I mean, right now we're in a heat wave in France. People are, passing out and dying because they don't have AC. So if the electric company shuts you off, that's a real, like that, even before you think about your boss, you need the water to run to live. You see what I mean? So there's this material conflict where the notion of what's at stake takes on a different sort of valence in the 21st century, and how we respond to it is different because we're no longer just organizing with people in our workplace, but all of our lives. It's almost like a post-situationist critique. Like all of daily life is at stake. And so we have to have a movement that can organize the greatest number, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm getting into the organizational model. Do you have more questions about the theory part? Was I unclear there?
No, I mean, it's fairly clear. I think it's interesting you bring up of communization. I guess there's also an implied critique of traditional Marxist-Leninist and Marxist Orthodox party building.
Yeah, we don't believe in that. Like or I guess the France Unbowed doesn't believe in the traditional form of the party. And actually, Mélenchon just last Saturday was at the Historical Materialism Conference in Paris, and he quoted Lenin to the effect of saying that he, radically opposes what it was. How do you say this in English? Substitutism.
Yeah, substitutionism or substitutism. Either one would work.
Yeah. So he's very concerned about substitutism, and as he put it, my perspective on this puts me at the limits of libertarian, like what he means by this, like anarchist thought, right? So there's the idea that the party, not only does the party not replace the class, we don't really, or the Unbowed don't really think that there is a need for the form of the party, that actually the form of the party and the forms of the old left are not apt for this moment. So what they propose, I guess I'll jump into the organizational form. What they propose instead is the movement form, which is a gaseous network based on the observance of how these revolts actually happen, which is like through WhatsApp and Telegram and all this stuff, right? So they built a social network where people can above ground set up little assemblies called action groups. And these little groups get together and, they can do stuff as basic as go door to door knocking, passing out flyers, putting up posters, having a conference, having a protest, whatever, going to a picket line, whatever you need to do, you can do in the Popular Action social network. And then there's a whole bunch of Telegram groups and WhatsApp groups and stuff like that that people use to coordinate. And it's basically, it's not horizontalist in the sense it's not like a dogma of the horizontality, but it is really horizontal in that you have, people who are like the point people, the co-animators, as they say, the co-facilitators of each group. That's usually a man and a woman. Generally speaking, the Unbowed, everything is one man, one woman. It can also be two women or, a non-binary person or whatever, but we generally try to prevent it being from a boys' club as much as possible. And then from there, it works up through the national through basically, as we say in French, co-optation. You might call it organic centralism. There's not a party congress. There's not internal tendencies. There's no caucuses like in DSA. There's no votes over those kind of things. There are biannual assemblies of people in the movement where there's like the national proposes an orientation text and some detailed documents about like how the budget is spent, et cetera, et cetera. And people are selected by sortition to go to that. And that is approved in a yes, an up, down, yes, no vote. And there are amendments that can be made, et cetera, but it's not, it's not a Congress in which anybody can just bring whatever, right? It's a consultative process. And this is something that's critiqued in France. Like a common critique of the Unbowed is that they're calling for all this democracy and like a radically democratic society, but they don't prefigure that internally. And the response is that they don't prefigure that internally because they don't believe that running a political movement is the same thing as running a state. So there's reasons for that we can go into, but generally speaking, the form of the movement is such that, there's only a few people who formally like have their card with the movement, and those are the people at the top level, and everybody else is just like a user of the application or someone who shows up to events. And there are roles that people fulfill, but none of these things are formal in the way that they are with a political party, right? They're not, you don't get voted in to be like the county, boss or something like that. They try to avoid creating what they call local notables and avoid creating these kind of power structures. And I would say that I think there's currently like 500,000 or so people who are actively organizing in the movement. And if you look at a map, if you go on the Popular Action website, you can see there are groups all over the world. There's thousands and thousands of these groups.
So I was going to ask you then, since this is a very programmatic movement that seems to put the program above any kind of form of which the program might be manifested in, say, a party. What is the program of France Unbowed at the current?
The program is really long, and I don't have time to go through it with you right now. People can go on it needs to be translated, but in English, it's translated into Japanese. But the program is very long and detailed, and there's like a core document, which if people speak French or are willing to use Google Translate, they can look in it. And then there are thematic booklets, which cover in detail further things. And I guess this goes into the strategy, which I should talk about. So I mentioned that there's this theory of the people's era. There's this organizational form of the movement, and to just cap off on that, we would say that one of the goals of the movement form is to be osmosis oriented. We want the unbowed to be so present in society, so present in social movements, that it's unclear where it begins and ends. That's just this sort of omnipresent force in every union without doing entryism, right? Present in human rights struggles without trying to tell the human rights organizations what to do. And it also can pull from those movements and learn from them and take their demands up into the program without becoming simply their servants. So that's part of the organization. But as opposed to the strategy, the radical left strategy is basically saying, how do we do electoralism in the most conflictual way possible? We want a rupture with the existing order. So this is similar to like a revolutionary, traditional Marxist-Leninist party would agree with this. And probably where they would break from the radical left is that the radical left believes in taking power within existing public institutions. So concretely, in France, the France Unbowed runs candidates and proposes to be elected and to take power within the actually existing structure of society. The point of doing that is to enact an emergency program, which I just mentioned, that has all of these different points, and to call for a constituent assembly where the Sixth Republic can be deliberated, developed, built, etc. At that point, that's basically the horizon of the movement. At that point, I don't really know what would happen to it. Like the Unbowed would either transform or cease to exist, or I don't know what would occur after that. But once you get to the Sixth Republic, you're in a new political situation. And so, do you think your listeners are familiar with what a constituent assembly really entails?
No, I don't think they are.
Okay, so just to put it very briefly, a constituent assembly means that all of the current institutions in society, like the public institutions, are put in the trash, and you have a big legislature that decides what the new ones are. So you get people together from all across the country, and they decide, you know, in the US context, for example, a constituent assembly could just get rid of the Supreme Court. Just say, we don't have a Supreme Court anymore. All questions that would have gone to the Supreme Court now go, I don't know, to Congress or something. Or it could get rid of the Senate. Or it could get rid of the presidency. Or it could replace the presidency with, you know, a bi-weekly rotation of peasants in the mud, or what, you know what I mean? Like, it's in the Constituent Assembly, basically anything is possible. This is different from a constitutional convention. Did you cover Chile on the show? I don't remember if you did.
I did. I did during Boric's two constitutional referendums, and or during Burke's rise in his constitutional referendum, which failed. Yeah, and the history behind that.
And how it was against constitutional convention and not a constituent assembly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So then people can go back and listen to that. Also, people should listen to your talk with Andy and Sean from Antifada. It was very good about Zoran. And I also talked to them about the election. So if people are like confused as to what we're talking about, go back and listen to Varn and Antifada episodes and stuff. But I would say that that's the horizon, right? So the horizon of the movement is to get to a constituent assembly in a sixth republic. And in a radical left strategy, the way you do that is by saying, you know, politics is fundamentally what? Dissensus. It's fundamentally conflictual. So if you elect us to go to the assembly, to go to the Congress or whatever, we are going to fight like hell every step of the way. We'll, you know, pull up Palestinian flags. We'll, you know, I guess in the American context, you would filibuster. You would use every possible measure to obstruct the, like, you know, the negative aspects of your opponents and to promote your positive program. So that's the role of the program, is really, and I think this is where the biggest break from the old left is going to be for a radical left. The radical left sees the program as the source of unity. So what allows me and you to be in the same movement or the same party or whatever is that we agree on what is to be done. We agree that we need a sixth republic. We agree that we need, you know, an end to austerity. We agree that, you know, trans people should be able to just go to City Hall and get their papers changed as they want, et cetera, right? And that's what brings us unity, not our opinion on Kronstadt or the nature of the Soviet Union, etc. And that's why fidelity to the program is paramount.
Well, this is interesting because, one, I think the American idea of a constituent assembly is non-existent. Like, it is not an understood tradition here in the States, as you well know, and you are originally from here. And I'm glad you pointed out the difference between a constitutional convention, because that's the closest thing most Americans can think of to this.
And just to say, the Constitutional Convention does not throw out all of the existing institutions. Like, it doesn't start from a clean slate, basically.
And I think from there, we can kind of see some big differences where there are movements that have elements of this in the United States. Marxist Unity Group, for example, is really big on programmatism, but it's also very oriented to building a traditional Marxist party based roughly off of their understanding of the late Second, early Third International. There are organic centralists, but they're usually associated with left communist and communization groups that are, to put it mildly, tiny. Usually less than like 100 people.
I was being a bit cheeky with that. Somebody might like rip me a new one for saying organic centralism, but it's the only thing I can think of to describe the internal structure where it's possible to like get promoted or to get modifications changed, but there is not a systematic internal democracy like in DSA.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because it deals with two of the problems that you have in traditional party building, which is, one, the faction ban, which actually ends up not just means domination by one faction, or the problem that you have of basically what the DSA has, which are these caucuses, but which are effectively micro parties within a larger non-party organization.
Yeah, just to speak on that briefly, I think DSA, when I try to explain it to French comrades, it really has the worst of the party form, because it has all the disadvantages that you just mentioned of having internal factions, having internal democracy, having these congresses, having all of this stuff, but they have no control. As far as I know, they actually don't have any control over their electeds.
None.
Whereas in like the France Unbowed, if you break with the program, you will be purged. You will be removed from the list, right? You will no longer be invested in the legislature. You see what I mean? And I think that's a big problem.
Well, I mean, basically, and the candidates that the DSA endorses are still Democratic Party candidates. I mean, effectively, with rare exception.
And ironically, the Democratic Party is not really a party form organization.
No,
because people don't have the cards. There's a Democratic Party Congress that people, you know what I mean? It's a little bit kaleidoscopic how absurd the American situation is.
I mean, yeah, the Democratic Party is basically a private corporation. It's like a private, not really for profit, but it's not NGO either. It's a private corporation that doesn't make money. And its internal leadership.
You lose this ability to actually, when you have no, like, if I support Zoran Mamdani. Mélenchon endorsed him. I'm glad that he won. We are learning a lot from him in terms of his, how he did his campaign. I think it was very impressive, especially the ground game and all the ads and stuff that he did. His sort of overall happy warrior present. Like, I think he did a very good campaign, and I have a lot of respect for him and the people that supported him and pushed him over the edge, right? So I'm not trying to come down on him at all. However, were he to, I don't know, pull a Fetterman somehow, I just don't know what the DSA would do about that. Maybe I'm ignorant, but do they actually have any mechanism to respond?
They can stop giving them. They can stop endorsing him. That's all they can do. And I mean, they can also stop giving him money, but the money that candidates might get from the DSA is minor, and then they can stop canvassing for him. But again, I guess 50,000 canvassers in New York is important. Although I like to point out that, like, even those canvassers, only a fraction of them can actually be DSA members, because the DSA is only 78,000, down from 100,000, and that's their official numbers. And another thing about the DSA that people need to know is that active membership and total membership are quite different. It basically takes a year to fall off the membership rolls entirely once you stop paying dues. So whatever the total number is, usually subtract about 10 to 20,000 to that, depending on the moment. If Democrats are in power,
did he do like an Obama for America style, or a Bernie? What was the Bernie for America thing called?
I don't. Was it a Democratic Revolution or whatever?
Our Revolution or something?
Yeah, Our Revolution.
So did Zoran have one of these kind of like made to order activist campaigns, or was it actually the DSA that organized all those people?
It seems like the DSA organized all those people, although Zoran's campaign apparatus is separate from the DSA.
Okay, understood. Anyway, not to get in the weeds about Zoran, I think, as I said, he did a remarkable job, and I applaud him. I just think it speaks to the problem within these kind of organizations when you don't actually have any way to call in your elected, right? It's
absolutely. I mean, and and with the DSA in the United States, it leads to kind of incoherence. So, for example, when Democrats are in power, the DSA hates Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When the Republicans are in power, she becomes a darling again. And it's not just the DSA that does this, and the DSA has its own internal points on this, but you see this over and over and over again. And because of the structure of the DSA, and this is why I think it's good that you point out the differences in organizational form here. The DSA, it's kind of at war with itself between the people who want a party, the people who want a movement that may or may not be a party, such as a communist caucus and the libertarian socialist caucus, and then the
libertarian socialist caucus is crazy. They're gonna come for you for that.
Yeah. Sorry. That's a Freudian slip, but I'm going to leave it in.
They're just out there withering away. No, but I feel you. There are caucuses within DSA that have opposing organizational aims, really.
Yeah, directly. And it's also hyper federated. So the locals have a lot of power outside of the caucus system. And in fact, the caucus system really fills in for the fact that there is no regional organization or governance in the DSA. So the caucuses are how the locals kind of communicate with the national, which are just otherwise constitutionally separate. It is a mess. And what makes it even weirder is there are some areas that try to have regional DSA coalitions. I think there is one in California, and they were trying to form one in the Southeast at one point, but they don't really exist. The other thing is, and I want to point this out, France Unbowed is way, 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 way larger than the DSA, particularly when you compare the population of France to the population of the United States. Like
if you imagine if you had 500,000 DSA people just in Texas,
right? Exactly.
And you had 71 Texas state reps.
I mean, how big is
bigger blocks? The Unbowed are one of the bigger blocks, even taken alone without the new Popular Front. With the new Popular Front, it's the hegemonic force within the single largest block of deputies in the National Assembly. So it's not some like marginal, weird, quixotic thing. Like Mélenchon was within a margin of error of being in the second round of the last presidential election, and he was really only undermined because the left didn't unite behind him. Right? There were people that were getting 1% of the vote that spoiled it for him. So this is a movement that is, has not won, right? I'm not going to sit here and say everything the Unbowed is confirmed. The great, revolution has arrived. We've done everything. But I do believe the Unbowed have shown that what they're talking about isn't nonsense. Like, it has real material incarnation, and it actually works. And if you think about the theory of the people's era, right? What is the process? I didn't mention this before. What is the revolutionary process that we've seen over the last decade or so? Mélenchon would say there's 4 steps. There's the instituent step. We are the people, right? People come out. There's some kind of event, like a raising of a price of transportation or some kind of other trigger for, unrest. People come out brandishing national flags and claiming that they are the people. That's why he talks about the people's era. It's because he's reading what people actually do and say in struggle, right? It's a theory based on observation. The second step is we want them all to go, right? The people want the fall of the regime. It's the destituent step. And that's when you have, big conflagration, people pushing to get, whoever's in power out of there. The third step is some kind of dual power scenario where people form these popular assemblies. And look, I lived through this process, Derick. I was in the Yellow Vests. I saw this happen firsthand. I was part of these assemblies that were formed. And they were even federating on their own. Like there was a neighborhood assembly, and then there was a kind of broader assembly of the general area and of the region. And then finally there was a national assembly, right, that I attended. And it was nuts. I mean, it was crazy. There were moments in the Yellow Vest that I really believed that Macron was going to flee the country because people were chanting, "Hey, Emmanuel Macron, we know where you live. We're coming to your house." And going around the streets of Paris in anger. And then the fourth step of this sort of theory of the people's era would be the constituent step, where some new regime arises from all of this, right? In the French case, we believe to do that requires winning the presidency, basically, So that because the presidency in the Fifth French Republic has a lot of power, it's like a semi-monarchical situation. With that in hand, you can push things, to the next step, which is to have the Constituent Assembly. And with the presidency, you can assure that the Constituent Assembly will occur on good terms, which is not what happened in Chile, right? That's just not what happened there. They had a hostile president. The president was basically forced to do the Constituent Assembly against his will, or the Constitutional Convention, right? So that's the overall structure. People can poke holes in it and say that maybe it doesn't make sense or it's not really like that. I welcome critique. But I think this is a lot more solid. Like, I don't see Bernie going to historical materialism and talking for an hour and a half with Marxist academics about how his approach, it elaborated in his books, his theory of revolution works.
Yeah.
And a thing that Mélenchon says all the time is, without clear theory, there is no clear action. Like, that would be, I think, the big challenge from the unbowed to sympathetic left electoralists all over the world. Is like, what's your revolutionary theory?
Well, it does seem like Unbowed gets out of the problem that both the European left populist and the American democratic socialist have, which is a kind of quixotic relationship to the current regime in the state. Because most of what Bernie and co do here, and maybe we can speak more about Syriza and Podemos, but do here is, frankly incoherent, and it's based on defending prior gains, and maybe, the goal is to extend them out. But it doesn't deal with a fundamental distrust and hostility towards the state itself. It doesn't deal with the anti-democratic elements of the American democratic in quotation mark regime. It doesn't deal with the fact, even when they're calling things like abolish the Senate, they have no means to do that. The way they would do it would be within constitutional norms, and they have no way to reset those constitutional norms except through the Senate, which they're now arguing they need to get rid of to have their constitutional norms changed. And so you get in this circular, incoherent motion. They were also like that with the workers' movement. Like, we need the workers' movement to come to power, but we need to come to power to empower the workers' movement to exist again in the United States. You can see the problem there when you state it out that way. And I will say this, one thing I've been impressed with Mélenchon, the more I've learned about it, is France Unbowed does not have that same problem. It might have other problems, I'd love to hear what people think about it, but it doesn't have that problem because it starts off with the demand for a constituent assembly and an admission of the fundamental problems of the current French Republic, in a way that, say, the Socialist Party of France could not do, under Hollande or any of its people.
No, and we did an article from my friend Ali Haynes for New International where he compared Hollande's recent book, The Challenge of Governing, to Mélenchon's recent book, Now the People, right? And Hollande it's third wayism. That's the dominant Socialist Party ideology, is some kind of, we want to govern the existing institutions well.
So the one critique that I know is going to get thrown at you from a kind of traditional leftist that I know that you have an answer to, but I want that answer to be articulated, is how is this not a left nationalist approach? Like, what is the internationalism here, and where's the strategy for that?
What's the strategy for internationalism? So there is I guess you could say it's a nationalist in the sense that it's a political party based in a single country that, is invested in a sort of narrative about France. And so some people are going to say that that's questionable or whatever. But the way that the sort of French identity is negotiated within the France Unbowed is, in my view, subversive of what most people are going to call nationalism. For example, the question about the national flag. I remember when the LVS began, a lot of people on the left were complaining that the Yellow Vest protesters were all far-right reactionaries. And look, the proof is that they're waving the tricolor. But when you listen to people, when they fly the tricolor, they fly the national flag of Algeria or Egypt or whatever in the protest, it's not, I mean, some of them, yeah, are xenophobes or racists, whatever, bigots. But for a lot of people, it's about that instituent moment of claiming legitimacy. Like the flag represents the country, the nation, the people. And they're saying, look, this is us. We're the ones with it, right? It's like they're claiming the symbol to claim legitimacy for their action, right? And the way that's been negotiated with the Unbowed is by saying that, like, we'll fly, some people will fly the red flag at a protest, and some people will fly the tricolor, because the tricolor really has its origins in a anti-racist revolt and blah blah blah. And whether or not that's historically true, or you believe that or whatever, the idea, the narrative of the whole Republican history of France always has this liberatory, like, teleology in it, right? Mm-hmm. So that the true meaning of the Marseillaise is really the same as l'Internationale. The true meaning of the tricolor and the true meaning of the red flag are the same. And actually, if you go back and read like Bluesky or other figures from the 19th century, you can see the moment where they shifted their discourse on this. It was based on basically the royalists and the liberals appropriating the French Revolution for their own symbolic ends, right? Mm-hmm. But Bluesky, as a young man, was, waving the tricolor, trying to make an insurrection. And I don't really see any reason why waving the tricolor has to be interpreted as a neo-colonialist nationalist move, especially when, like, the France Unbowed is the force within French politics the most favorable to Kanak, like, liberation. That is, we're going to Senegal and meeting with Senegalese movements similar to our own on a fraternal basis. There's this whole European left alliance where there's basically been a decision from. Have you covered European parliamentary politics at all, or not really?
Not really, no.
Okay. So there's like
basically, but I haven't covered it.
There's an existing left bloc in the European Parliament with like Delinka and all these other forces in it. And recently, the Unbowed led a kind of scission from that, or a new bloc emerging from that, however you want to put it, that is more radical and has like, I think there's Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Poland, Portugal, Spain. Am I forgetting some? I don't remember what other ones are in it. I would have to look it up on Wikipedia. I forget all the countries that are in there. Mm. But yeah, there's this move. I mean, there are moves to a more international orientation. I think where people that are looking for a more traditional, like 100 years ago left, are going to be disappointed is that the Unbowed don't really believe in an international, right? Of like a singular international federation, like the Third International or Comintern, that's going to impose things on the different national movements or parties or whatever. Does that make sense? That just seems to be sort of passé. That doesn't seem adequate to the moment. So rather than doing something very formal like that, I think the idea for the Unbowed is like, Mélenchon went to Quebec, he came to the US, other members of the movement went to Hungary, they go to Poland, like Rima Hassan, one of our European deputies, got on the Freedom Flotilla to put her body on the line to, bring food to Gaza. You know what I mean? So I think like the internationalism is there, right? The internationalism is the fact that people go around and try to build international solidarity wherever they can. But at the end of the day, the France Unbowed is a French movement, and you can't, it's not really possible to have. I'm not sure how it could be more international at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it does get into some of
the overall international politics is one of non-alignment. Like France Unbowed wants people to come out of NATO. That's like part of the program is leave NATO, have a non-aligned politics, try to build a non-aligned pole, build on international law, right? Have the UN send like blue helmets to, cover nuclear sites in Ukraine to build like a demilitarized zone. Like there's a lot in the program about internationalism. So the idea that it's a nationalist movement, and specifically when it comes to migration, it's also probably the most radical left-wing electoral line on immigration I've ever heard. Like basically the response to immigration for the France Unbowed is, yeah, in 2050, half the population is going to be mixed. And creolization is just a fact of life, and it's a good thing, and it's always occurred. And, you know, everybody's role in France is not based on your genes, your blood or something. It's based on, do you have this shared, life in common? Do you have this shared common good with your neighbors? I mean, Mélenchon went so far recently as to say that the French language should be renamed because it doesn't belong to France, because France is only a minority of people that speak French. So people on TV are like calling him the Antichrist every day, because he went so far as to say the French language shouldn't be called French anymore. I don't know how to be less nationalist than that.
Yeah, as an American who speaks English as my primary language, and who knows that my language is like the number one second language in the world, it does feel weird that we're still calling it a language based on an island empire from 200 years ago. But anyway,
yeah, it really doesn't belong to the English. Like it actually doesn't.
Right.
So it should get a new name. We should rename it. Varn is now proposing formally to rename English.
I'm okay with that. So it is. I think this. You get it. There's some implications about the common trend that I think you brought up that I want to zoom in here, because it is a problem historically, and that is like the common trend enabled a lot of international cooperation, but it was also basically under the province of one country's foreign policy by the middle of the 1930s, and that becomes a real problem, including its dissolution in 1942 to make the Allied powers feel better. So one of the problems with such a formal organization like that as your form of internationalism is whoever heads it up really gets to set the terms of it. So I get why there would be a legitimate, let's say, fear about bringing that kind of internationalism back. That's part of why, for my critique of modern, for the People's Republic of China, that I've always criticized them for not being internationalist enough. But one of their points that I think is valid is that, the common term was used against them, and that's part of why they don't bring it back. And they want to respect national sovereignty. Now, I admit that national sovereignty is a sticky wicket for leftists, because it can be, on one hand, it's going to be a force for it's a force for trying to liberate, say, Gazans and other Palestinians and the Levant. In another way, it is the calling card of some of the most reactionary forces in Europe and North America right now. And
is one of this covered in the manifesto?
Yeah, you would think so, but
I mean, we want we don't want big old empires as part of the sort of process. I don't know. To me, it seems like not that hard in the 21st century today. Like, unless you're a crazy blue labor metaphysician, I don't know who is really pining for the British Empire on the left. Like, you have to be some kind of crazy reactionary for that. No.
One would hope that you wouldn't see that. I mean, one of the weird things, though, is right now, for example, the critique of NATO in the United States has been pretty much, in most circles, left to the right. So when someone like me says, basically that NATO has, even from the standpoint of NATO's original terms, even from a standpoint of America's, original interest in the creation of the organization, if you think that's legitimate, which I don't, but even if you did, that NATO doesn't serve that purpose anymore. That purpose no longer really exists. There's no Soviet Union to curtail.
NATO should have been abolished. I mean, but it's a tool of U.S. imperialism. But I think the correct line on that, I actually think the Unbowed are basically right on NATO, that member countries need to leave NATO and develop a non-aligned foreign policy.
Yeah,
like that's that's an obvious move. Where it gets complicated with stuff like Ukraine, because on the one hand, you want to, if you accept, and I know a lot of anarchists are not going to accept anything that I'm saying because it assumes certain things about the state that they don't believe, namely that the state is a kind of terrain of struggle in itself, that there is something to be fought over within the state, right? If you don't believe that, if you think the state has to just be destroyed in the kind of cataclysmic eruption in which all aspects of present society are suspended and some either an escape is possible from that or some new form of society can emerge in that, then you're not going to like what I'm about to say. But, for those of us who do believe that there is something to fight over within the state, how do you respond to one state invading another, right? How do you respond to that kind of aggression? I think if you have a Republican political ideology, well, you're going to say, well, no state has the right to invade a republic and attempt to make a regime change. That's an illegitimate move. That's not allowed, right? So obviously we support Ukraine because the Ukrainian people have a right to self-determination, et cetera, et cetera. Now, articulating that without articulating, and that's why we need austerity to buy more tanks to send to Ukraine. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of problem that we have now, is we have to walk this fine line between not going over and being like, actually, it's all a scam to, sabotage our dear friend Putin. You see what I mean? You want to avoid that error and also avoid the error of buying into a war economy, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is why all we can do is really push on diplomatic negotiations, international law, the role of the UN to blah, blah, blah. And it sucks. It's not a great position, but I think it's the only thing that's coherent. It's the same thing with the two-state solution. The other day, there was a debate with some unbowed comrades like, well, why are people still talking about the two-state solution? That's because if you're going to do politics right now, what is the diplomatic avenue for a one-state solution? Just wait for the IDF to finish the job, and you know what I mean? Wait for all of the West Bank to be fully Swiss cheesed. We know that that's what's happening, right? But if you're actually in the institutions trying to do something now, the two-state solution rhetoric, for better or worse, seems to be the only sort of the only move immediately is to try to do BDS and to recognize the state of Palestine and stuff like that, and to do the ban on arms and everything.
Well, I think this is important because part of the reason why I have such a hard time with let's just say nationalism and the national question is I freely admit that if you're going to use any kind of international law appeal, you pretty much have to have legitimacy as a nation to do that. Hopefully one with the state. If not, you at least have to be a formally recognized nation by the international powers. If you aren't, you don't really have anything to appeal to. And we can see this, and we can really see this clearly in the case of Palestine, but also to some degree with the Kurds. And there's a lot of other groups that this comes up with. I will say though that the problem for me is I've never found a good place to figure out exactly which nations that don't have historical states are legitimate or not, and where did your claim, how small of a unit are you dealing
in the
with?
Absolute, or how to actually do it right? Because I'm talking about how to actually do politics right now.
I mean in the absolute. I mean both in the absolute and in right now. For example, do you support Catalan independence? Yes, no.
Me?
It's an abstract question, but
yeah,
it is
I would.
Okay.
I probably would say yes because I like the Catalan people and I enjoy going to Barcelona and everything. I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure what is the line on Catalan independence, but I assume that. How do you put this? The problem there's a big gap between the absolute and the practical on this issue, though. For me, the way to cut through this would be for the And I think I can, say this would be sort of an unbowed-y way to think about the problem, would be to say, well, we have to defend. It's the same thing actually on the domestic level, right? You were talking earlier before about Bernie and like defending the FDR, Great Society, New Deal, Lyndon Johnson legacy of the Democrats, right? So like those things should be defended. Like I want my grandma to have Social Security, so we need to defend Social Security right now. But Social Security is not the be all end all. So you have to do two things at once. You have to defend Social Security and try to expand the I guess we'll say it. Can I say the O word?
Go ahead.
The Overton window. Maybe we shouldn't deploy the Overton window in this context, but you have to you have to fight to expand what is within the realm of the sort of common good while defending what's already in that, right? So like rights is a really easy domain to see this in. Human rights talk, like there's a good critique of human rights. Human rights is all like metaphysically based. In the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen of 1789, it's, the French people under the auspices of the supreme being declare that this stuff exists. You see what I mean? That's the foundation of it. And at the beginning, it wasn't, women didn't have the right to vote and blah, blah, blah. And over time, all of that rights stuff got expanded out and expanded out and expanded out. And I don't see why this is any different on the international stage. We want to take power away from the US and Russia and China as like big, strong countries and try to transfer it as much as possible to neutral, quote unquote. They're not really, but you know what I mean. You would try to get or actually forget it. Forget this sort of idealistic way of putting it. Let's put it in terms of raw power. We want conflicts to be handled diplomatically and not with nuclear weapons, right? So we want there to be international fora like the UN for handling problems. And every day that the nukes are not dropped is a good day. And we keep working on that. I mean, and maybe I'm rambling, I'm not making sense, but it seems to me that's clearly the solution here is to, just as we're trying to overcome the institutions in this country, you have to do the same as at the international level. But you can't do that until you have, until we have the foreign policy of France in hand, we can't. There's not much to do other than to protest.
Well, this actually brings up a point because you kept on using non-aligned movement, and I was like, okay, I understand metaphorically what you mean, but very practically what you mean is like when people posit the bipolar world or the unipolar world or the multipolar world, the multipolar world is still a world in most cases where there's 4 or 5 major imperial poles. That's why there are poles. That's the implication of that. And that regional dominance is considered legitimate even of other republics. So the United States will have regional dominance under the Monroe Doctrine, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of right-wing anti-imperialism in America is actually under the valence of this Monroe Doctrine, which is itself still it's imperial. It's just much more limited in scope. Similar to Russia, the Ruski Mir is a similar claim. The Chinese regional homogeny in East Asia is a similar claim. And it seems like what you guys are proposing is a non-polar world. And I laugh, but I laugh because non-aligned would be we're not aligning to any of the major poles that currently exist, although we might work with them in a certain capacity. And to flip as to kind of elaborate as to why is that one of the implications of the multipolar world where there's these 3 to 5 great powers vying for each other is historically these, and I know there's lots of multipolar Marxist Leninists who utterly disagree with me on this, but historically there's a game theoretical logic for these poles to try to pull people far away off of the local hegemon to weaken a major competitor. And this leads to things like the Thucydides trap, which we're seeing with the United States and China right now. It leads to increased conflicts by proxy. And there is a chance, a real chance, that these conflicts by proxy, particularly with a lack of international mediating force, become hot wars between great powers. And that is definitely what happened in the 19th century. That's also what happened in the Warring States period. That's what happened in the 13th century in Europe. If your major concern is that we not nuke each other and that we keep, death and war to a minimum, at best, it does seem like international mitigating forces plus limiting the influence of major powers seems important, just so they can't undermine each other and increase the likelihood of direct conflict.
Yeah, and think about the overall. Think about what I was saying with the People's Era, right? And this isn't in the program. This is beyond the program, right? Because the program is not a total document that addresses every problem that it can potentially be considered. Okay, but let me just speak for myself based on my understanding of the sort of principles of the movement and the overall theory behind it. Climate change is a major problem. It's a very serious issue. It's a global issue. It can only be handled globally. There's no way to locally fix it, right? So in order to actually address climate change, like imagine, Derick, for a moment, that we were actually going to try to stop anthropogenic climate change, like stop contributing, stop making it worse. Imagine if people were seriously going to do that. What would that require? That would require global coordination. Are the existing international institutions sufficient for such coordination? My argument would be no, they are not. What would be sufficient? You would need a lot more intense global coordination and institutions to power that than we currently have, right? It would almost be like a global republic would be needed. I think that's the sort of logic of what I'm saying writ large, is that eventually we have to strengthen the international institutions such that they can operate more and more like a sort of supranational structure for this kind of coordination. However, given the actual existing state of things, right, that is a bit utopian. And so the immediate sort of move is to say, for example, France actually needs to exercise more sovereignty vis-a-vis the European Union and NATO, because these supranational forces are dominating and drag us into this kind of polar orientation you were talking about, right? So ironically, the first step is to not exit in the sense of Brexit, but to like really, well, I guess it would be an exit for NATO. So yeah, you would exit NATO and you would defy the European Union where necessary. And this actually goes back, if I can just briefly do a detour, to something that was very instructive in the formation of the prehistory of the Unbowed, which was the 2005 European constitutional referendum, which the French people rejected. They rejected the European Constitution and the neoliberal measures that it would impose. And you know what happened, Derick?
It was ignored.
They did it anyway.
But say, I think in almost every European nation, it was rejected. It wasn't just France.
I know in France it was rejected. They did it anyway, right? So like, that's the fundamental issue, is when it comes to all these supranational things or international things, there has to be a respect for popular sovereignty. And that's the sort of Republican socialist heritage, right? Which I think popular sovereignty is not opposed to internationalism. Do you think it's opposed? Like when Bluesky was in the National Assembly, and I believe this was during 1848. It might have been in the 1830s. And the crowd was overwhelming and calling for him to take the tribune. They were all calling for him, Bluesky, tell us about Poland. Bluesky, tell us about Ireland, right? Like, I don't see a reason why a popular sovereignty movement has to be nationalistic in a xenophobic or jingoistic sense.
So I'm going to repeat what I said on Antifada, for those of you listening in the future, because when I'm going to release this, I think it's a full communism summer episode. But that in the 19th century, there was very little incentive for the working class to be pro-war and particularly nationalistic and jingoistic. In the 20th century, there was a lot of incentive for that. In the 21st century, I think there's a lot less, but it's kind of a path dependency that a lot of people have, and so I think a lot of people, a lot of popular movements probably wouldn't ultimately end up being hyper nationalistic or anti-internationalism. I really don't think that. Like most American workers, even some of the most xenophobic ones, really don't want to hurt Mexicans in Mexico. Their misunderstanding is that they think that they are losing trade leverage due to immigration, which is in many cases false. Although I will say not in all cases, and B, as we see in that they're quickly learning, they don't really like the outcomes of when you actually try to apply this stuff. Because all of a sudden you got people raiding, your cities, and you got troops called in on the ground to do immigration raids, so that it's deliberately more theatrical.
I mean, that's where I would start if I was listening to this episode and I was like, how can we build a radical left in the U.S.? That is where I would begin. Like, you can either say crazy stuff like we need a new constitution, which I believe the U.S. does need a new constitution, and we need to make conflictual everything in American politics. Or you can have the conflict in the street with random guys in masks coming to grab your grandma.
Right.
Like, you have to have the conflict somewhere. And I would say the radical left needs to just assume the conflictuality and say the conflict is with the Democrats and the Republicans, and to name the enemy and to fight the enemy. And that's where I think, to go back to your stuff about Syriza, Podemos, and even people like AOC, where they have fallen down, right? Syriza balked. They balked.
Absolutely.
Podemos, Delinka, what did they do? They ended up compromising with the center left and tailing the center left. What did AOC do? Compromise with the center and tail the center. And what does that result in? In my view, that makes them less credible, and then people support them less, and energy deflates. People get defeated. I know you don't like the word hope, Derick, but allow me to speak about affect here a little bit. There is something affective in look, Zoran can win, right? Whoa, we can win. Now people are motivated even more than they were before because it's real. It's not just wouldn't it be nice? Look, we did it. We won something. And if you can win and then win and then win and build, if you look at Unbowed 2016 till now, the score has only gone up over time because they keep winning and fighting. And, you have a guy that looks like you who comes from your neighborhood who's talking about, the stress of the pressures of rent and, wondering if I'm going to be homeless and getting evicted from my apartment when I was a kid. And he's in the parliament talking about this and telling off the bougie rich guy from the private school that you hate, right? And that all contributes to a movement that seems real, that can fight. When you've got people out there saying, when you actively defend the Palestinian people, when you actively defend migrants, when you actively go out there and you're fighting for trans people and you never budge, right? When you plant the flag and you fight for it, that's a rallying cry where people can come and join and actually build a movement. And I would say that's the missing, that's what America's missing. There is no radical left like that in the US.
I would agree.
Maybe Zoran can be the occasion for it to be built, right? Maybe DSA has, this embryonically within it, but I don't see, this doesn't to me seem to be what Bernie did or what AOC did. And that would be my critique of both of them, is that they tail the center too much. I mean, we saw that with Biden-Harris, no?
Yeah, we did. I mean, this is what I was trying to get at in that conversation. And yeah, I don't love the word hope, but I do think affect matters. Just I also don't know what dignity means, but I know it really motivates people. I don't know what justice is, but I know it really motivates people.
I mean, do people die for a 10% increase in their wage, or do they die for liberty?
A little bit both. But yes.
No, I'm saying like liberty is a very motivating thing for people.
No, affect matters, and I think my skepticism of this has always been tinged with the fact that I know, for example, that even though I don't know what dignity means, I know that it was one of the motivating factors in Allende's victories in Chile that the French Communist Party just not the French Communist Party, the Chilean Communist Party, although the French Communist Party had the same problem, actually, couldn't really contend with because they just wanted to bracket out affective motivation for people because it's too abstract or not materialistic.
Yeah, I mean, the Unbowed break with that tradition radically, just like they break with productivism. The Unbowed is not a productivist model. Like the Unbowed are saying, how do we deal with climate change? We need a ecological bifurcation and like massive planning.
Yeah.
Like it's not, I mean, I don't know if it's exactly the future is degrowth. Maybe that is how it would be translated in American context, but it's, and to this day, the PCF is still on that line. The French Communist Party is still on a productivist, everything you're saying. I think it's a major issue. And the thing about affect and hope, as I was saying, to bring it back to our, the line of conversation we had a moment ago, is when AOC comes out and says, working tirelessly for a ceasefire, and then Ilhan Omar comes out and says, yeah, everyone knows that was a lie, that is highly effectively damaging. That's extremely demotivating, especially for the most committed like activists and militants that you have. Like, right. I don't know. Can I trust this person? Why did they do that? That's the opposite of what you want to do. And that's the product. That's when you like do Syriza. That's when you do Podemos or Delinka in the negative sense. You see what I mean? Right. Now, I think Delinka and Podemos are changing. I'm not following them very closely. My understanding is that Podemos is turning away from that tailing of the center strategy. And I think Delinka also is turning away from it. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if they can kind of correct course, Mm-hmm. But I mean, obviously, you saw the fruit of it. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's what I've been trying to hint at when I talk about Mandani is not like we should be like celebrating him uncritically, because how are you going to hold him accountable? How you're not going to accidentally create another AOC? He does have more message discipline than AOC actually, but like one of the things I like to tell people is like, even like me personally, if I want to exercise and I want to actually hold myself to do it, so I defeat my own procrastination tendencies, what do? I tell people socially that I'm going to do it, and they'll shame me if I don't. And I've chosen that. Like, I have chosen that relationship. So I accept that shame as opposed to like some rando on the internet trying to shame me. I don't give a shit about them. And it's a way to hold yourself accountable to your own initial movement. When you don't have a way to do that, and you don't have a program, I mean, that's one of the big things that I have said about all American left movements is a very few of them have a stated program that's not ideological. And by that, I mean, like, that aren't about like me arguing about past, I mean, but if you look at Marxist,
is why DSA has 75,000 people. Is because democratic socialism is vague. And what does it really mean? And then once you're in it, then you're in this like organizational soup. I really am not. I think there's a lot of great people in DSA. I'm not trying to like undermine them at all. What did you have? Like the Liberation Caucus make a public statement. Then it was like, in favor of like assassinating people in the street. You know what I mean? Like it's completely incoherent. And I don't know. I don't want to be an asshole about it. I just think I think that the people who want to like be Trotskyists in the 21st century, I just don't understand.
No, I mean, but I've had the same thought. Like, people will accuse me of being a Trotskyite or this or that, and I'm just like, it's just not. I mean, I hate to tell you, and I know there are a lot of people who listen to the show who disagree with me, but like, once 1992 happened, none of that's relevant. Like, why am I arguing with Marxist Leninists about other
when was
than
last
his
time there was a socialist revolution anywhere in the world?
It's been a while.
Has there been one since 1992?
Specifically socialist revolution, I would say no. There's been national liberation movements that may or may not have some socialist elements to them, but you're right. I don't think there's been a.
So, like, what is the explanation for that? The Unbowed have an explanation for that. The Unbowed explanation is that the workers' movement, historically was a kind of, the proletariat was a minority socially. You know what I mean? And so the proletariat had to constantly have these sort of strategic questions about how to orient to the peasantry and the artisans and the petit bourgeoisie and how to do all these fronts and things like this, right? And today, the material conditions have changed. It's not that the proletariat is abolished or superseded in a way. It's just that the notion of how capital affects our lives the reality of how capital affects our lives has changed such that the proletariat is no longer the subject, right? It's part of this broader thing that the Unbowed called the people. Or really the populace, I guess is one way of putting it, is that you have the populace, because the populace is those who are subjected to network capitalism, right? And they only become the people as the active subject of their own sort of common destiny when they organize. You see what I mean? That's when they become that's sort of like the proletariat in itself versus for itself distinction. Is if I was going to translate the Unbowed theory, it would be that the proletariat for itself is the people, and the proletariat in itself is just like the population of these the urbanites, basically. And this goes back also to 19th century revolutionary history, because where did all of the big, conflagrations happen? They happen in cities.
Yeah, they did.
And now cities are everywhere. So this issue of for example, Varn, do you really believe that the division of town and country needs to be abolished in the 21st century?
I mean, I think it mostly has been, to be quite honest, although we do have to deal with incorporating agriculture more effectively into urban thought. But that's
imagine Amadeo Bordiga is here with us now, right? And we're talking about the immortal science and the invariant program. And you're going to tell him, actually, the division of town and country has already been abolished. How does he respond to that? And I
mean, it probably splits with me immediately,
Marxist
but
respond to that, because that's part of the Marxist, the program, right? But it's abolished already. So how do you respond? I think this is where people like the communizers made a good point of to say capital's already done a lot of, things have changed. Where I think that line of theory kind of falls apart is okay, so what? You've read all of endnotes. Now what do you do? I don't know. Maybe I'm just. You're better read than I am.
I've read all of endnotes, and what do? I think they want me to wait for either a riot or ecological crisis to force everyone to get along, because a lot of us start dying. That's really that's all I can take from them, to be quite honest.
So there's nothing to do now.
I mean, I'm sure that Jasper Burns or Phil Neal would say that there probably is things to do now, but I can't figure out from their own theory what there would be to do. No.
Well, there's at least you have to do the workers' inquiry and the infrastructure inquiry. You have to do that kind of thinking stuff, right?
Right. But again, if you really believe Joshua Clover, the late Joshua Clover did, then even that doesn't seem to matter. It's well, the riots will happen in response to capital, and I agree, they are. And the strike is less effective because there's less centralized manufacture that involves mass amounts of workers. There's still plenty of centralized manufacture, and I agree with that too. But then I'm okay, but what does a riot inherently turn into? And I mean, I have to I don't know, pull a weird Alain Badiou to talk about another Frenchman theory about when riots are non-corruptible and how they could lead to other new organizational forms beyond even the party, blah blah blah. But then And I actually kind of agree with that, but I can't know when that's going to happen preemptively. So that still leads to a very passive politics where I'm just waiting for the right event to emerge out of the right riot. And that's like the most charitable reading I can get out of some of that. I feel like Burns lately has sort of changed some of where they're going, but you know, yeah, I agree with a lot of their critiques of the way the historical communist movement hasn't answered certain things. There are a few things I disagree with them on, but today it just seems it seems weirdly passive, except for we should riot when people riot, which I'm just like, okay, cool, but
let me articulate something here. Let me just narrate a little bit about the LVS because this will be clarifying. So when we're in the middle of such an uprising, it's very unclear what's happening.
Agreed.
It's very chaotic. A lot of the actual study of how these things work happens after the fact when you go over like video and photos and news reports. You know what I mean? That's when you actually get in the weeds and you study like what were people, what did they have on their signs? Like what was written? You know what I mean? When you're in the middle of it, I just remember, oh shit, something's on fire. Oh God, the police are coming here. Oh, they're firing. We better run. You know what I mean? Like that's what it's actually like in the moment. But I do remember because the yellow vests took so long. I think I personally participated in, I think it was 30 or 35 weeks of mobilization. That's a lot of mobilization, Derick.
Yes, it is.
That's a lot of mobilization. And what occurred is you have this initial explosion where like, oh God, people are on top of the Arc de Triomphe. Oh, what's happening? Oh, is the president going to flee the country? And in those moments, at first, people are just like running to where they think the action is at. Like they're running downtown to join the protest or to march or whatever, right? Over time, and I believe this does bear out the unbowed theory, like Mélenchon's theory, about the instituent, destituent, dual power, constituent, like 4 steps. Because I remember all of a sudden people said, hey, there's down the road, there's a local yellow vest group that's formed. Because, they formed in all these, like in the rural areas, it was in the roundabouts, right? But in urban areas, they would just form in different locations throughout the city or the suburbs. And so you go, and what is this? Is a council. So up until here, I think like me and Jasper are on the same page, no? Like we basically have a little council, right? And then it was federating. So there was like, federating up regionally, nationally, or whatever. And then the problem was that the movement ran out of steam. Why did it run out of steam? Because they were fucking, and sorry, I don't know if I can cuss on your show.
You definitely can. I swear all the time. Go ahead.
Okay, so people were like getting their fucking eyes blown out. I saw eyeballs rolling on the pavement. There's blood everywhere. People getting arrested, people getting kettled, people getting deported, people, all of this shit was going on. It was very fucking violent. I saw like, do you know what are these? There's this kind of motorcycle cop where like one is on the front and one is on the back with like a gun or a maybe not a gun, but like a launcher of some kind or like a club. And they just
I saw them in Egypt. Through.
Yeah, they speed through and like hit people with the club. That happened in France. So once you get to that level of conflict, we're like, oh shit, it's really going down now. This is not just like a cool protest thing, right? I remember, and like, look, I've always been on the more mass politics, pro-social, kind of politics. I'm not somebody that is like an adventurist by political orientation. I've never been that way. And so I would go to the yellow vest stuff, and see like the grandmas of the neighborhood have their banner, right? And the grandmas of the neighborhood are getting menaced by the guys on the motorcycles. You see what I'm saying? Like it got so real, so fast, and so intense, and the repression was so hard that when it sort of like collapsed, it collapsed all around you in an exhausted pile, and it was very hard to continue, especially with COVID. So like COVID was really the nail in the coffin of the yellow vest movement, to the point where some of the yellow vest guys were, conspiratorial, thinking that like, oh, the lockdowns are really just to stop us, right? Which maybe in a way they were about stopping everybody from, moving around in general. But so what do you do given that nature of social movement, that it comes in waves like that? Do you just wait for waves? Or is it possible to have something like the Unbowed that can have osmosis with the movement? It doesn't try to dominate the movement. It doesn't try to do entryism into the movement, but it's just sort of there with them, in and with the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when a movement expends itself, or when a movement needs reinforcement, like when the Earth Uprisings movement, the Soulèvement de la Terre, had this big battle in Saint Celine over these mega water basins,
Mm-hmm.
Unbowed supported it. They were providing support. So is it possible to have this kind of political above ground, normie-friendly electoralist movement that has what I consider to be a revolutionary orientation? Because I consider this idea that we need a rupture with capitalism and, you know, the prevailing, like, we need a new political and economic order. To me, that's a revolutionary program,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a pro-revolutionary movement that exists in and with the social movements and gives them a kind of backbone or a kind of continuity over time, so that when the yellow vests, you know, whatever happens, whether they win or you know, lose or whatever, their demands, like one of the yellow vest demands was for the citizens initiative referendum, the idea that ordinary citizens should be able to do like a petition to force a national referendum on various subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea, but something that a lot of the LFS, well, the Unbowed can bring that to fruition in a constituent assembly. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
even as just a normal law, like as part of the temporary program, you could do, you could pass this as a law or something like that, right? So I think that would be my response to folks who maybe feel like they want to be in a pro-revolutionary thing, but they're not Marxist-Leninists and they don't want to sell a journal and they don't want to sit around and wait, that you can actually just continue. And this is going back to your conversation with Andy and Sean. Like, what would it mean for Zoran's mobilization to be permanent? Because that's basically what the Unbowed is. It's Mélenchon's campaign transmogrified and made permanent.
All right.
Does that make sense, or is that too much? Did I go on for too long there?
No, you went fine. I'm thinking about it, and I mean, the issue is exactly what you thought. I kept on wanting to point out, both in terms of social democracy and the way we mobilize an election, and in terms of these anti-systemic riots that get recuperated over and over again because of exactly what you're saying. People start getting beat, they get arrested, people die. That also inspires reaction, even amongst people who may have been supportive generally. I mean, if you want to talk about similar things in America, like the discussions around Black Lives Matter after the George Floyd uprising / insurrection / whatever you want to call it, you saw a lot of that. You just saw recuperation, et cetera, and the question is, like, how do you maintain it without just being, like, frankly, a kind of grifty NGO that just takes the name? And that happened with Occupy here too, and that leads to also people not being able to look at those movements really in a real way. So, like, there's like people talking about Occupy Wall Street seems passe now, even though this would be the time to really study it. We're over 10 years out. We can really look at it objectively.
And a successful political movement, like I'm talking about, like a radical left political movement like the Unbowed, can provide the forum for that. One of the things that the Unbowed has is the Boissy Institute, which is what Mélenchon actually runs with Clémence Guittet. So his official role in the movement. Or are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Varn, are you still there?
Yes.
Hope.
Yes. I can hear you.
You cut out.
I can hear you.
I'm waiting.
Just pick up here.
So something important about having a large radical left popular movement is that you can create poles of attraction that allow people to actually work on stuff over time, reflect, build, etc. And Mélenchon's technical role in the movement is as the co-president of the Boissy Institute with Clémence Guittet. And the Boissy Institute is basically the Unbowed think tank. So it publishes books. There have been a couple books, one about the rise of the far right and how to stop it, another book about what some people call techno-feudalism. And they do conferences, they do events, they do webinars, all this stuff. And they also do a cadre training program where hundreds of people every year go to Paris and do like a 10-month intensive training on everything from historical materialism to how to effectively do door-to-door campaigning and set up electric generators and tents and everything. So that is a place in which sympathetic academics can come and reflect on stuff like Occupy, or reflect on things like the Arab Spring, or reflect on things like the Yellow Vest, and generate together new insights for the movement, both in terms of what needs to be done right now, and as well as develop the program, because the program is not static. The program develops over time. And one of the things, for example, a change in the Unbowed has been increasing orientation of, I would say, a better anti-racist line over time. A more and more clear anti-racist line where, in like 2016, 2017, maybe certain questions weren't fully clarified, and now they are. And some people had to leave the movement because they're more attached to a notion of secularism that is substantively Islamophobic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just one example. We don't have to get into the weeds on that. But something like having a Boissy Institute, or having, like, one thing that the movement has, I didn't mention this in the form of the organization, but there are committees to handle things like violence within the movement or deviation from the program, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are things that affinity groups don't necessarily have, and you can't, like, locally, when you have a consensus that goes awry, you can go up to the national and say, hey, there's this problem, there's this blockage, whatever, and the national can kind of keep an eye and prevent local situations from getting too toxic or too out of hand. And all of this is possible because you have this overall radical left orientation, right? You don't even, like, people participate in the Boissy Institute don't necessarily even have to consider themselves unbowed. That's how far the osmosis goes. People can come and participate in the cadre formation of the Unbowed without considering themselves to be unbowed. And that's how, I think that's like a winning recipe, right? That's something that you need for a real left to be strong. And that's why a lot of people say that right now is the closest thing to the sort of post-World War II heyday of the French Communist Party, in terms of a left that's actually mass and successful.
All right. I mean, I can see that, and one of the things that I liked, I talked to you about it because my knee-jerk reaction to anything with the words popular and front in it.
You're a big supporter of the Popular Front.
Yeah, totally. You explained to me the difference between the new Popular Front and the historical Popular Front once, in a private message, and it actually was comforting. I was just like,
Well, the new Popular Front is specifically, so it's this thing that happened last summer, right? Mm-hmm. And the cynical way to describe it is it's an electoral alliance of the different forces on the left to prevent the far right from coming to power. And it's also a life preserver for groups like the Socialist Party. We didn't really talk about this in our talk, but just very briefly, the Socialist Party and the Communist Party and the Green Party and all these guys on the left, this like historical old left, are collapsing, just like the center-right party. Traditional political parties are not doing well in France.
Right.
And so you have like Macron, who is kind of a new centrist force. You have the rise of the far right, and you have the rise of the Unbowed. And it was getting so bad that in the last presidential election, Mélenchon got something like 22% of the vote, and the socialist candidate didn't even get 2% of the vote. So really, these people are on their sort of last leg, and it's very ironic because the Unbowed basically comes out of the left wing of the Socialist Party breaking off. Is one way of looking at it, right? And yeah, so we kept them alive. The France Unbowed kept the other left forces alive in exchange for programmatic concessions. So the France Unbowed gave up seats in the assembly to the socialists and the communists in exchange for programmatic concessions. And what do you think happened after that?
What happened?
The socialists did not maintain their commitments.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first time there was a government brought in by Macron against the NFP, the socialists did support, making it fall. And so this was the first time a government's fallen without a, barricade going up in a long time in this country. The second time, they didn't maintain the same line the second time. And so we've had this sort of weird zombie cabinet for months and months and months now as the socialists try to triangulate a way back into relevance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But for us, and you might say, well, look, you see your strategy is stupid. Why did you ever trust them in anything? I don't think the Unbowed ever trusted the Socialist Party in anything. We understood that it was as we say in French, a rapport de force. It was a question of relative strength and of kind of strong arming them into behaving. And now people see what they do. And now people see that they don't maintain their commitments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the New Popular Front, for me, it was worth doing. It prevented the far right from coming to power. It increased our strength within the institutions, and it put the center in a hard place where it's hard for them to maneuver. They just, I think it was literally yesterday, they lost a vote to condense or privatize or whatever, to mess with public broadcasting. Mm-hmm. So you can think that's small ball, but within the ball of electoral politics, if you can prevent the people who are supposedly in power and supposedly have the government from enacting their program, that's good. You want to deny your enemy the ability to do what they want to do.
Right.
So,
well, this is the funny thing. When you described it to me, I'm like, well, that's what I mean by United Front. And I'm not going to tell the French what they should call what they do, also because the Popular Front has a history longer than even the Communist
one. Isn't the United Front specifically communist notion?
Yeah, it is. But it is
not relevant today. All those considerations aren't. There is no workers' movement like that today.
Right.
So it's just kind of it's historically whatever. And the New Popular Front, there's a risk that it's going to be used against the Unbowed, because there's a kind of, I hear, what I see happening is I see an attempt by the other forces on the left to try to counter the Unbowed hegemony, because the Unbowed do basically have programmatic and, militant hegemony. In any given town, there's way more Unbowed militants than there are for all of the other forces combined.
Mm-hmm.
But because the Unbowed have always been solid on Gaza, like we've seen with Mamdani, they're called anti-Semites every day. People go on TV and call them anti-Semites every day, and Hamas and everything, And it's bullshit, but it doesn't matter, right? The truth about these things isn't important. And so I think there's going to be an attempt to do a kind of left primary, like an NFP primary, which is really a way to try to prevent the Unbowed or to counter an Unbowed candidacy. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's sort of a game of chicken of are the socialists really going to commit to a strategy that means Le Pen or Bardella comes to power? That might be their interest. I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, for the Unbowed, the question really isn't about them. That's another thing we didn't talk about that maybe we should. The Unbowed also have a specific electoral approach, which is an analysis of electoral blocks, where basically they see there's a bourgeois block. We can call it the center block if you want. And then there's I won't go into the whole thing, but the big strategy of the Unbowed is to go to what in American English we would call the ghetto, to go to the poor neighborhoods, to go to the popular neighborhoods, as we say in French, where people actually live, and to say, let's get you registered to vote. Let's get you on the rolls. Let's get you in an action group. Let's mobilize people as much as possible. Mm-hmm. and try to change the electorate, basically, by getting people who are abstentionists to participate. We're not trying to win over convinced Socialist Party voters as much as we're trying to reach people that don't usually vote.
Well, I mean,
which some people call the Great Replacement.
Yeah, funny, great, lovely.
No, I mean that's the discourse. We're like the agents of Islamism, and I mean that's the discourse. So Mamdani, like this is going to be something he has to face. He is going to be treated like that.
Yeah, no,
he's
absolutely.
An anti-Semite. He's going to be asked to condemn things he never said every single day. And if he's strong, I think he is strong. Like I have some confidence. He seems like strong on this, no?
Yeah, he seems good on this. On this area in specific, I actually do have some faith in him.
Yeah, and he's smart. And like, you know, he people ask him like, do you condemn things you never said? And he said like, you know, I want New York that's good for everybody. And that means we need to freeze the rent. Like he's just really good at bringing it back to the bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you got to do. Do you have other questions? I feel like I rambled a bit because we got cut off there. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I don't really have that many other questions. My point about the Popular Front is that you have to be clear on what you're doing. And so like,
who's tailing who? They were tailing
I don't know that anyone's tailing anybody.
No, I mean, in the new Popular, that's the question to ask. Like, who is giving the concessions? We gave up seats in exchange for programmatic concessions because we don't care about having seats. We care about advancing the program. There was even a point during the NFP discussions when Macron was like waffling about who to name for government, where Mélenchon came out and said, we support an NFP government with no unbowed in it, no unbowed ministers. Because we were standing on the program, not on we need ministers. What do we need ministers for? We have the hegemony, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, my point on that is just that what you are trying to do there is push a program and stop a counter program. Like, yeah. And when I talk about the United Front, which I agree with you, doesn't really make that much sense now because we're not in that moment. But then I also kind of feel that about the historical use of the term Popular Front. But that's what we should do. Like that's even like what Marx said we should do is like, you know, coalitions of our own interest. We have a programmatic interest for what we're doing, and most of our coalitions are to stop other things from happening. Why we build up our own positive programs when we take power. That's it. So me getting like all huffy about whether we call it the Popular Front, and again, I also want to point out that term in specific has a longer tradition in France that predates even its communist usage in 1936 than it does, say, in the United States. Oh, yeah. And so, like, I'm not here to tell French people what they should call their stuff.
I'm happy to hear critique. I think the key thing I want to like transmit to the audience is let's talk less about personalities and ideology and more about program. Like ideology to me is interesting insofar as it informs the program. Everything is about the program, actually. Because at the end of the day, like I've been recently reading in the Russian Revolution about the Russian Constituent Assembly, and I think I might have takes about it that might piss Derick off, right? Mm-hmm. But does it actually matter? Is there any programmatic cash out to that?
No. I mean, and this is my thought when I do union and workers organizing. It's the same thing. Like, are we aiming for the same practical goal? Do I care about why you believe in that goal? Not really.
Like if I was in DSA, I would be trying to get all social democrats out of it.
Yes. I mean, it's funny because...
Not because I'm opposed to them as people. Or let me put it this way. If I was in DSA, I would be trying to make very clear that the program of DSA is not social democracy. That's a better way.
Bingo.
I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you can get on with that, then fine. If not, screw off, basically.
Yeah, and what I'm calling social democracy, just so I'm very clear to the listener, is this idea that the way we handle social inequality is by growing the economic pie and better redistributing that growth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what social democracy in the 21st century means. I'll ask you a question, Derick, if you want. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
How much of what I'm espousing as what I'm calling the radical left do you think is just classical social democracy?
I mean, honestly, I think about probably 50 to 60% of it is, I mean, because one of the things that we have to talk when we talk about social democracy is like what I call a social democrat today has very little to do with what that was historically was before World War II.
Like, are we doing a new classical liberalism?
Kind of. I mean, what we can say to me right now is that these changes that Mélenchon zooms in on are changes that have changed the way that both the left and even, let's say, liberals to court respond to politics.
And the right. It also affects
exactly. Right. It very much affects the right. It affects the right in weird ways. And I think there's this in America, I don't want to talk about, how European leftists and centrists
let's just stick to American examples. That's fine.
Right. But in America, there's this assumption that because there is a strong loyalty to a demagogic figure, that the right is unified, and in a superficial sense it is. But that demagogic figure, Trump or Bush for the neoconservatives, Reagan for the Reagan coalition, is actually papering over in his person profound programmatic differences that lead to total incoherence when they go to actually do anything beyond
which you talked about in your episode about General Boulanger.
Right. Exactly. And this is why understanding French history actually is really helpful as just for people who want to know, like, why do you want to get Americans to learn about French Revolutionary history? Because, well, it's France. If you believe the American Revolution was even kind of a revolution at all, and I do, I know I'm actually becoming a minority on the American left for saying that, although it was an unfinished, highly partially reactionary one, blah, blah, blah. I'll give all the appropriate caveats.
Well, obviously, the American Revolution is people that think it's just not a revolution. That's insane. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're just like, oh, they don't like the content.
It was a colony that became a republic. What are you talking about?
Right, I know, but the republic was a settler republic, and that settler republic was bad. Therefore,
yeah, a revolution could be bad. You can have a revolution that installs, I don't know, some kind of nasty demagogic dictator. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's
right.
Revolution doesn't necessarily equal happy.
Well, I mean, but for me, this is just like a weird moral thing. And also, like, the contradictions that you talk about in France also exist in the United States. There was non-settlerist elements to it. And when people are like, oh, we should have stayed with the British Empire. What are you on?
Well, I mean, that might have been a position, like, if we're doing a historical evaluation for certain, Indian groups, it would have been total sense with the British Empire.
Right. No, it would have made total sense.
And that's why they did. That's why they fought with them, So I think we can have a critical analysis of the American Revolution without pretending, like, Pasquale Paoli is a liberal. He's still a revolutionary. Right.
Well, I mean, my point about this, though, in so much that you have this in the U.S. tradition, we are seeing that play out. And the one thing I think we've had 4 republics. I know that probably other people would disagree with me, but most of the American shifts in our role of government and the way we define our institutions have been let's just say informal to the point of being hard to talk about. But
this is where you do radical engagements on Master of the Senate with Andy.
Right. Ooh, that's a good idea, actually. Because the way the American Republic worked from, like, let's say 1781 to 1830, from 1830 to, to the Civil War, from the Civil War to 19 say maybe 1912, then the interwar period, and then from the interwar period to now, and then post 9/11. Actually, I should actually say that's 5 republics. Are very, very different, and that's not understood by a lot of people because we haven't had the formal. We've never had a constituent assembly. We've kind of bullshitted our way out of dealing with our constitution, to be quite frank, which is why everything has been held together by norms.
Among militants because, as I say, America doesn't have a strong radical left. So without a strong radical left that can do like cadre formation, like in France, I know I'm precipitating you a little bit here. I'm sorry, but like obviously in France we have more explicit changes in governance than the U.S. But like a lot of French people don't know all that until they join a movement and do the popular education.
Right. Yes. There you go.
But go on with your story.
No, I mean, but because there's a massive rupture in the U.S., the U.S. far left, that's never really recovered since probably I'd say since like World War II. There is no historical memory of this stuff, like at all. Like I mean, yeah, there's
that's
nerds
why
like
it's
me
dominated by academics, and it has this sort of bad. I don't want to say bad faith, but like a bad conscience about being academic. You know what I mean?
Bingo.
Because the academics are the people who know.
Right. I mean, but we're not trusted by the people who this is relevant to. And I say we. I mean, I'm not formally an academic anymore, but I was. That's why I learned this stuff. And
yeah, obviously, people in prison like educate themselves, and there's prisoner support networks and stuff. But it's obviously, being in Angola is not the best place to learn about all these things.
No, absolutely not. And it's getting harder and harder by the day, honestly. So it's just, I think this is where the French really do have an advantage, but also understanding French history gives us a way to like view ourselves because, since I was a teenager, you might get a as someone who's dealt with both countries for a long time, but I've always thought that the weird American hatred of the French was this strange form of self-recognition, like that we have more in common with like Republican France than we do with Imperial Britain, but we're also deeply embarrassed by it because it messes up our own history. I mean, Republican France is, pre-Republican France is part of why we have a United States in the first place.
Oh yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird form of bad conscience that we don't really engage with the French revolutionary traditions and learn, I think
it's the reason why hold by Bolshevism. Like I actually blame the Bolsheviks for a lot of this in terms of the broader left consciousness, because I think part of the dominance of Bolshevism in the 20th century led to the second and first internationals in the 19th century, 18th century, and really previous. Like, do you know that when they did the Russian Revolution, they put this obelisk up, and on the obelisk was inscribed the names of all like the precursors of the revolution? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I believe right now it's in Moscow, not far from the Kremlin. And like on the names is like Thomas More.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Thomas, Jean Jaurès is on there, right? And like people don't even know who Jean Jaurès is because the Second International is not known, because the First International is not known. And so like Blanqui exists as a caricature of armed uprising, but like nobody knows that Blanqui considered that the French Revolution was this sublime, daughter of the gospel and philosophy, and its ultimate declaration of the rights of man and citizen contains within it the seeds of the future communist society.
Yeah, I know.
So like the negotiating liberalism and socialism, and like this is why I'm very happy for people like Bruno Leopold and his book Citizen Marx. And you actually did a number of interviews. I forget his name. It's Matthew. Who did the radical liberal?
Matthew McManus, the liberal socialism and stuff.
Those discussions were very interesting and useful. So I thank you for doing that. Right. But I just think it's people need to think through, like, do you really, like, as a leftist, what is your goal here? What does democratic socialism mean? How does it cash out? Are you really going to propose that there's no human rights in the revolution? Like, what is your line? Like, what? Actually think about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would say people should do that. And
You
I
know,
think that's where, like,
I'm with you.
Republican socialist orientation is useful, is it draws a line from the Bill of Rights to a revolutionary future that's more than just like Bill of Rights socialism, whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. I mean, I've even pointed out that like the American revolutionaries play a key role in as good liberal bourgeois revolutionaries for like Ho Chi Minh, and it's part of like Ho Chi Minh thought of Vietnam today, and
Ho Chi Minh, co-founder of the French Communist Party.
Yep, funny enough,
I think he founded 3 in total.
Yeah, he did a lot. So these things are super important, and I do think right now the American left is in this weird discourse with itself where it's still not willing to look at its own history, its relationship to European revolutions. I mean, one time when I pointed out like Marx's difficulties in dealing with Simon Bolivar, the response I got, well, Marx was racist, and I'm like, well, but so was Simon Bolivar, and like, so was Napoleon. What's your fucking point? Like, I mean, yes, but that's not gonna help you much when we try to figure out what to pull from these traditions, because also, yes, they are racist by our standards, and I actually think we should admit that, but by the standards of the time, they're really not terribly bad, in that like they think that all races have the potential to be joined the nation of humanity, and they have like usually some cosmic raza notions going on that everyone's going to blend together, and we're going to get over these racial differences in the long term anyway. And I bring that up because in the US, these seem to be like real impediments to discussion about the way these traditions interact and what we do now. And the reason why
there's no radical left.
I would agree with you. There really isn't a radical left tradition here that isn't basically weird sectarian movements. I mean, because the average left the average left organization in America that isn't part of, say, a centrist liberal coalition for like quasi left wing social values has historically been under 5,000 people, usually between 3,000 and 5,000 people. And even though in those movements, in the late 70s, for example, there was probably 1 million people in those movements altogether, but they were so disorganized and refused to work together in even a negative capacity. I mean, even to stop something from happening, that it's basically a lost tradition. And you know what all those groups shared, and to bring it tie back to your initial point, is that if they had a program, their program was ideological. Yes. You had to agree on an ideological interpretation of history. And, maybe it had implications for what to do, but there was not immediate implications for what to do other than some nebulous notion of revolution most of the time.
Yeah. And this I think ties into 2 things. The first is I need to clarify what I mean by the radical left. I should have done this at the beginning. I'm sorry, Varn. I got done with work today. I sent my kids off with my mother-in-law and my wife so I could have some peace to do this recording. And I was a bit discombobulated with the internet access issues we were having. So I did not clearly define the radical left. I don't mean the word radical left in a general way when I say it. I mean in a very specific way. In French politics, we can talk about 3 lefts. There's the social democratic or center left, which I think we've discussed already. I don't need to elaborate it. There's the extreme left or far left. You can say ultra left if you want to piss people off. And these are the people who are on the sort of fringe, these sort of fringe groups you're talking about, right? What separates the center left and the far left? Well, this is known in America because these are the only lefts that exist. The center left is your Bernie AOC, basically. The far left is your PSL or I don't know, the ISO doesn't exist anymore, but the ISO would have been a good example. Or like crime think or something, right? On the far left, the debate is like, do we participate in elections at all? Right? On the center left is, how do we win? And then the radical left is the specific orientation that says, we are participating in elections to win. So that's similar to the center left because they actually want to win. However, like the far left, they want to do it for a revolutionary purpose. You see? And that's the specific thing that's missing. And when you don't have that, and you don't have programmatic emphasis and unity, and there's no like programmatic outlet, there's no outlet for political energy or the desire for change, people don't think there's any way to change. And I remember being like a young anarchist in America, Varn, and having old heads tell me that there will never be a revolution. I mean, that's like pure lifestyleism. And I think it would have been assumed as such. I can't go back in time and ask this question, but I think it would have been assumed as such with the idea that, no, the situation is screwed. There's not going to be a revolution. We're not going to get to a better society. So the question is, how do we live like ethically now, you know, given this situation? And like, there's a romanticism and a heroism in a sort of nihilistic facing the, you see what I mean? But that's not something that can build a mass movement. And so in that context, when revolutionary potential is foreclosed, there is no revolutionary horizon that's really possible, then your political identification becomes on your interpretation of the situation and you know, of history, because you have no programmatic outlet. There is no, what are you going to apply a program to? What are we going to eat for dinner?
Right. Yeah. There's correct.
It's all identitarian because that's all people have. And that doesn't mean, like, in the Unbowed, there are identity conflicts. Like, if you come to a thing and like there are people that are, you know, like veiled Muslim women and virulent Trotskyist atheists, it's not obvious that these people are going to get along, and we shouldn't like paper over that. But they get along well enough because they have a common, you know, there is a general interest, and there's a particular interest in the program for both of them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm
fired up. I'm holding the mic in my hand. I'm like about ready to go jump in the ring and box.
Well, I mean, I think this focus on programmatic unity is like, that's where I've been at, and my specific instance in this is my intervention, maybe not instance, that's not the right word, is that these programs should not be primarily ideological. Like,
yes,
how I feel about every single thing that the Soviet Union did should not be the arbitrator of whether or not we're in political allegiance. It is our goals that decide that. And
100%.
when you have no goals and your goals are like, oh, there's no revolution because it's not going to live up to this, you know, abstract ideological conception immediately. I don't know how you're not just a lifestyle. I mean, I don't know how you don't become just a lifestylist. I totally agree with you. Like, because what are you going to do? I mean, like if you have to agree with my particular brand of Second International, hard Leninism, are my particular understanding of, I don't know, labor aristocracy and its relationship to the 1950s, and which period of Mao I like the most. And what my personal opinion is about Shining Path or something. That's a fandom. It's, you know, it's an identitarian fandom.
If you want to talk about Star Trek, Derick.
Right, exactly.
But the thing with the radical left, and I want to be careful because I know you've got a lot of listeners that are highly ideological. I don't want to like just piss on them. We can still learn stuff from left history, and we do.
Right.
Like, there's an old guy that I work with here where I live, and you know, he is an ex-Maoist, and he always brings some like wild citations of Mao to meeting, but often they're pertinent. For example, reduce the target, neutralize the intermediaries. That's just sound strategy.
Right.
That's why, for example, when the Unbowed talk about Palestine, they don't talk about it like certain axis of resistance types. They focus in on the figure of Netanyahu. It's Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's government is the consistent focus. Why? Because it's strategically advantageous to do that. We put all of the emphasis on the person at the summit whose downfall would be critical for the situation to actually change, right? The downfall of Netanyahu would be a major cataclysm in Israeli politics, and it would open a way to destabilize the genocide. So we focus everything on the ICC warrants, and you see what I mean? We focus everything on the Israeli government, and people criticize Israel more broadly. We know that the war didn't start on October 7th and all this stuff. But politically, you use those kind of insights of, reduce the target, neutralize the intermediaries. That's one of the reasons why, for example, I doubt the DSA strategy of being proud socialists. Did you see the interview with Zoran Mamdani and Charlemagne the God and Ebro in the morning and everything on Power 105, the Breakfast Club?
No, I have not yet.
Okay, so basically they go on, and do you know who Charlemagne is?
Yeah, I do. I know who Charlemagne God is. Yeah.
Okay, so Charlemagne, he got up and was talking, and he's very favorable to Mamdani. He was giving him a very favorable interview, clearly showing, and Charlemagne, and I should talk about this also with the Unbowed. The Unbowed also does cultural hegemony stuff. I was in Paris recently, and there was the music, the big national music festival, where basically everywhere in the streets there's different bands and stuff. And the Unbowed had a stage, and on the stage was a pretty serious French rap act called Medine. And that's actually cool. There was young people there, you know what I mean? It was a pretty big show in the street, and it demonstrated the connection between the Unbowed and the youth, and so that kind of cultural projection is also very important, right? But anyway, Charlemagne was clearly supporting Mamdani at a certain point, said, but everything you're talking about, it's just common sense. The stuff about making sure there are grocery stores in all the neighborhoods where there's food desks. I forget exactly what he said, but he's basically going through Zoran's program, right? And he said, but why do you have to get hung up on all this talk about socialism? I actually think Charlemagne's right. What does talking about socialism actually help Mamdani with? It seems to me like it's just a pure downside. Talking about socialism only alienates people because they have some preconceived notion about what it is. They think it's the Soviet Union or Castro or something, which is not what Mamdani is proposing. So why does he need to present himself as a socialist? Why does that have to be his presentation? That's like an unbowed way of thinking about public communication, because the Unbowed is not the French Socialist Party.
Right.
The Unbowed is this new, the term in French is insoumission is not a historic term of the left. The France Unbowed doesn't plaster red everywhere. And Mélenchon tried to do that before. Before the Unbowed, there was the Left Party, which still exists, which is like a typical red and green alliance type branding. And they don't do that branding anymore because it doesn't speak to people.
That's fair.
So why are we, do you see what I'm saying? Why politically, it doesn't mean you don't be a historic, when Mélenchon does an interview with academics, he'll very obviously say, I consider myself, part of the historic current of historical materialism. That's my intellectual family. And he'll talk about Marx and cite Trotsky and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But I think that's actually, is that kind of a truth nuke? That Charlemagne's right and that DSA doesn't actually, that branding doesn't speak to people?
Well, the goal seemed to be for a while to make that branding work better, and for a little while, and weirdly with a very particular generation, it seems to work. But that socialism has been repoliticized again in a way that reflects fears about all kinds of stuff, and I'm not sure that it really helped to link yourself up with either socialists, even if you were trying to make them more popular, or general progressives in America, because they're frankly not a super popular coalition outside of a few key urban areas. But as I've said, as a lot of people said, I mean, Chomsky's been on about this for like 50 years, but he's not. This is one thing I agree with them on. Socialist policies are popular, and in fact, some of them are more popular in areas where socialists are less popular as soon as you say the S word. And conversely, like if you're in, say, the Bay Area in California, socialist policies actually aren't popular, but socialism is super popular as a watchword. And that paradox just seems to like go over people's heads. And so I don't always care what people call me. Like, there's all these debates about whether or not, I mean, I consider myself part of the Marxist tradition, but I'm not an orthodox Marxist because I don't know what that means. I'll be quite frank, I'm not sure that's relevant anymore.
I don't know that you can be in a Marxist unity group, Derick.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like what would that, I actually have thought about that because I am sort of like, well, what is it like, what is Marxist unity as opposed to like left unity or workers unity? And and like I have my criterion for example, entering the DSA, and if they had a program I agreed with, I would get over even the fact that they give money to candidates I don't always support. Like,
yeah, and that's because you're sold on the radical left principle of programmatic unity,
right,
which I am also sold on. And I would say, because I know I'm giving a little heat to the socialists, within the Unbowed, there does exist the Unbowed Communist Association, but it's not a tendency or a faction. It's basically a discussion group of people who either came from the Communist Party or reclaim communism in some sense, who that term speaks to, right? So it's not like the word communism or socialism is verboten. It's just not something that's projected in terms of public communications, and you see what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I would in the United States, even with other socialists, like the moment I say the C word, that freaks people out. Still, I mean, yes, there's people who own it with pride, but like I was talking to somebody the other day, agree with like 80% of what I wanted to do, which for me is always like, well, we're in the same coalition and we could agree on a program. And the moment I said, well, they asked me what I thought about communism. I'm like, oh, I'm tired that, I view myself as in the tradition of the historical communist movement. And they're like, well, I'm a democratic socialist. I don't think, I'm like, calm down.
Well, that's Bolshevism. Again, that's the legacy of Bolshevism. In 1900, you tell a socialist you're a communist, and they're like, me too.
Right.
Like, for me, it's an impasse that we have to get over, right? I like you, I also use the term communism liberally, right? Which is why we use it in New International. But New International isn't a political force, right? New International, like we use the term communism in New International to clarify that there's a commitment to a particular vision, like there's a historical vision that the magazine sees itself as participating in, right?
Right.
Which is fine for a journal or a publication or like end notes as a informal like discussion group or whatever can, you know what I mean? That's fine. But when you're a political organization trying to actually change institutions, I think it falls short.
Yeah, and I don't see the point of getting hung up on names. Like, I just really don't.
Yes.
Like it I know there's some people going to yell at me about that, and I think if the program is the more important thing, and getting that program out, and I do think that program has to be responsive and dynamic and stuff like that. This is my difference from a lot of ultra leftists who think like the program was discovered in like, I don't know, 1927 and will forever be whatever it is.
The program changes over time, but the problem is that you have to have some way of maintaining its integrity, and this is where we come back to the problem of internal democracy. Because if you just like get everybody that's pissed off, like if you go to Occupy Wall Street, okay, are you ready, Derick? All right, we're gonna step into the time travel machine, and we're going back to Zuccotti Park.
Okay,
you ready? Okay, now we're stepping out. We're in Zuccotti. Now, Derick, you go do a poll, and you ask everybody what do they want to be in the program, and you tell me what you got.
Oh dear God. Probably profits over people, a returning share back to the from the 1% to the 99%. Let's see, a humane productivism, some form of anti-racism that would immediately start a fight.
So there's no there's no programmatic unity over anti-racism.
I mean, the only programmatic unity about anti-racism would be that racism is bad. Like that would have been the programmatic. Like
it's a problem of internal democracy. And if like you and me form an executive committee in 2011, and we're like, all right, here we go. We've got the program. Let's go. Well, who are we? We're not legitimate to propose anything. So to me, there's a big chicken and the egg problem with the program where like somebody like Mélenchon was already well known and capable of building a competent team that could credibly, build a movement, right? And that's where in the American context, I think it's going to be a hard lift. And I don't know, maybe DSA can like transform into that. I mean, what do you think the prospects are for a radical left in America? Let me just ask you that question.
I mean, I will say stuff like anger at the Constitution is becoming much more real. So being able to talk about that directly is real. There are various groups. I mean, we talked about Marxist Union Group as one of them, but there are various groups that realize that programmatic unity has to come out of something real. And by real, I mean stuff that actually delivers immediately, not just a nebulous promise of overthrowing everything. But right now, the orientation seems to be it'd be hard right now here because there is such a fear over the right. But I will also say, for the first time in my lifetime, even quote normal progressives are also fed up with the Democratic Party. Like they're no longer just making excuses for them in the same way. They're really angry. So there is a space for it to emerge, but it would require people to get over what they think they're already doing.
Zoran might be able to do it. Let's say Zoran gets elected as mayor of New York and is a big success. Zoran might be able to, without like abolishing DSA, he might be able to surpass DSA in the same way that Mélenchon surpassed the Left Party, where like the Left Party still exists and participates in the Unbowed, but it's kind of it's just a small organization that also participates in Unbowed. There's also a post-Trotsky, I guess there's still a Trotskyist party, how do I translate this into English? The Workers' Independent Party, which is like a Lambertist group that also participates in the Unbowed. So there's ways for like legacy left organizations to participate in the Unbowed without totally abolishing themselves. So it could be possible for Zoran to do something where like he builds a radical left movement based on his success and like whirlwind popularity that doesn't have all the baggage of DSA, but that DSA can like seed the fundamental like cadres into. So imagine you got like the most competent people from, I don't know, the DSA left and right who listen to this episode and understand that actually there, we need something better than this. Those people could seed such a movement and then start to like build it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without having to abolish the DSA. I think that's one way it could be done, but I think it would require. I would have said AOC, but after, am I over reading how damaging the whole working tirelessly thing was for her?
Okay. It was really damaging. I will say that it's kind of been forgotten. My thing is, I don't think she wants to do that. I think she wants to be a standard Democratic Party politician with a more progressive bent. I mean, I really do. And I think, unfortunately, Bernie has decided that she has the most name recognition, and this anti-oligarchy tour has effectively patched his torch to her, which has, in some ways, with a lot of people who weren't following American politics very closely, have caused them to just not pay attention to what happened, because both the thing on Israel and her stuff with the suppression of the railroad strike really hurt her with a lot of people who are in tune on the American left, but the general public barely knows that stuff happened. So,
because she could, I mean, maybe she could turn it around and lead something like what I'm talking about. Who knows? But let's say she doesn't. Let's say you're right, and let's just like play out this political fiction just for a minute. Just humor me for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Zoran does it. Zoran is a good mayor. He builds this kind of broader movement, and then it grows across the country. And now we see Zorans spreading. Like people are doing copycat campaigns. They learn from him how to do the good door to door. You know what I mean? They learn, and this is actually something I kind of breezed over with you earlier, but I want to pause. Can I just say it's incredibly empowering for people who have no political experience to be part of that kind of campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think this is a big problem that like ultras have, is like you have to go from 0 to 100 real quick. You have to be like, and now you're going to lose an eye,
Right. Yeah.
Whereas when you do like stupid electoralism, quote unquote, people can gain confidence and like learn how to do a meeting, learn how to go put up posters, learn how to talk to your neighbors about politics. You know what I mean? Learn that stuff is important, and it also makes people feel like there is hope, or they're actually doing something. You know what I mean? They go from being spectators to actors. That's very important. But imagine that Zoran does that. Imagine that Zoran leads this, helps this mass movement grow. Well, that's obviously going to lead to a conflict if it maintains a radical left orientation with a center left, like a social democratic orientation of somebody like Cortez.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
and
no,
in
100%.
France, this played out by people that were with Mélenchon for a long time being purged from the movement because they weren't programmatically solid. And
I mean, I think the key here, though, is you need a program. You need, you do need a leader to bring that program about. I mean, like, as much as I would love for all this to just organically emerge, you and I both know that's not likely to happen.
It's part of the current time we live in. If you look at all the new political forces, like Five-Star Movement in Italy, it's Beppe Grillo, Le Pen with the National Front and Marine Le Pen with the National Rally, Mélenchon with the France Unbowed, Macron with his center bloc that's been renamed multiple times. Trump basically did it with the Republicans. Bernie did it with the it's just part of contemporary politics, this kind of like celebrity factor, and I don't like it, and we have to fight against people like worshiping politicians like celebrities, but I just think that's how politics works today.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are in a quasi Caesarist moment, so we do have to deal with that. And
who's going to go on TV? Who's going to go in the media and like incarnate the thing?
Yeah. No, you need someone to stand in for. I mean, you need someone to at least speak for the movement, and when you don't have that, it doesn't really go anywhere.
It doesn't really go anywhere, and you can counter it. Like the Unbowed, for example, like Mélenchon's getting old, right? And he's been cultivating people around him. So there's like multiple people. I could have talked to more about, Manuel Bompard and Mathilde Panot and Clémence Guettet and Paul Vanier and Antoine Léaumont and Daniel Obono. There's lots of people I could have mentioned I didn't mention that are in the movement, that are on TV, that are, you know what I mean? But that's part of like trying to overcome the system internally, is by getting 71 deputies, you allow more people like that to emerge. I mean, look at how fast Zoran emerged. He won a fucking primary. Like, you need people to win. That's actually one of the reasons why electoralism is good, is because it allows for figures like this to emerge and to like enter the national stage. Otherwise, how do you get a national leader? How do you get anybody that's like qualified to go on TV and talk? I mean, haven't you talked about this in the past? The like reliance on the end of the new left cadres for everything?
Yeah. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
You can't fix that unless you replace them with people generationally. So I guess for you, what is like the I know we agree on a lot of this, but give me some heat here. What am I wrong about? What am I unclear about? What are my contradictions?
The thing I think you do have to look at is, there, like, you keep on talking about how to hold these people accountable. There is something holding Mélenchon accountable beyond his own integrity, right? Which he does have. Another thing, you actually do need politicians with integrity, because one of the things is when we speculate on AOC, my problem with her is like yeah, she's popular enough, she got enough name recognition, but I have ample evidence that she doesn't comport herself with any integrity whatsoever. In regards to, I
don't know if she has no I'm not going to co-sign. That's to me a bit extreme. I'm not going to say she has no.
I'm willing to go that far, because and for me it was both the stuff in Gaza and the railway strike stuff, that like beyond the obvious electoralism, with making promises and talking about fighting Democrats and making concessions when they're in power. But she might have personal integrity. I don't care. Like, that doesn't affect me.
I see. Political integrity, the political plane. Yeah, on the political plane, she's lost your trust. I understand that.
Right. And frankly, it worries me when people trust her. But I do know that you got to have somebody to coalesce around, and we who've been trying to just coalesce around movementism in and of itself without any figureheads end up with informal academic figureheads. I mean, we think about this with Occupy. What emerged out of Occupy? The informal figurehead and anarchism of David Graeber, for good and ill, mostly in my opinion for ill. But Graeber, did have personal integrity in a lot of ways. And I know people might be surprised to hear me that. And I think he had political integrity in some bad ways, but he did have it.
Was Zizek big before Occupy? The Occupy was
he was. Zizek was growing as a response to, left academia in the early aughts and 1990s. So Zizek kind of was already like getting his seminars passed on social media like in 2009, because he was funny. But I think when we look at Zizek, really though has never posited himself as an actual political figure. It's it's all ideological discussion all the time. And I think when it comes to Occupy, we didn't really have a real political figure to stand up and embody around. And so Obama remained the kind of, even though arguably Occupy is a rebellion against himself, he remained a figure for them to coalesce around. And so as other people broke off and became more radicalized and moved away from the Occupy brand or movementism or whatever you want to call it, he was the figurehead that remained. And so without a counter figurehead, as much as I don't love it, you don't really have a lot. And Bernie crystallized that. I don't think we'd be talking about the DSA even though Bhaskar Sankara and Jacobin Magazine brought it back into some relevance before the Sanders campaign, but I don't think we'd be talking about them at all if the Sanders campaign had not happened. Whether I like that or not is irrelevant. It's just a fact. And whereas, you know, I have my theories to why communization got popular in the United States, and if I'm completely honest with you, it was because of negative polarization. Because otherwise, why would people care about left-wing academics, many of whom are poets, in New York and California, who were not known for their theory? And this is not to slam their theory. I actually think a lot of that stuff is brilliant. Even if I don't agree with where they went with it.
Negative polarization against Jacobin?
No, I think it was negative polarization because it was mentioned explicitly by Glenn Beck on air with Tikkun, and people started researching what Tikkun was, and then people started researching what these other things were, and then Endnotes published Endnotes Volume 1 with the Duvet Theory Communiste debate at exactly the moment that was beginning to gain steam, and people have read The Invisible Committee, and people wanted, and that also came out precipitous timely after Occupy, so it was kind of an answer to why, for a lot of people, to why
in the
Occupy
French context, it was also the nadir of the traditional left, with like Hollande basically doing the austerity bullshit in exchange. Like the only positive thing I can think that Hollande did off the top of my head was like gay marriage, basically.
Right, yeah. Similar to Obama.
So it's like we got gay marriage, similar to Obama. And I think this was a moment in which in France, it really did seem like, I mean, there was no like way out. I remember Julien Coppa and who was the other guy? The other main Tikkun guy. I'm blanking on his name. Mathieu, I think it's Brunel, were interviewed in Le Monde, unless I'm mistaken, and during the beginning of the Unbowed movement, and they were asked, and like, yeah, Mélenchon's never going to amount to anything. And like, as far as I know, their movement is kind of broken apart into different groups, as far as I know. And I just think, like, you know, whether it was negative polarization, I think it was responding to real things happening at the time, and people really. And I mean, there were, I've been a part of like the ZAD at Notre Dame de Lande, which was a really huge autonomous ecological struggle that won. So I think there's a lot of truth in that, and or that was, you know, demonstrated and revealed in that struggle. But I think the limits are, you know, we've discussed some of them. It seems pretty clear to me that, like, I go over and like I said, I was rereading Endnotes. I just don't know what the takeaway is.
No, I mean, that's been my thing too. I've actually argued with, you know, some back in the aughts. I argued with some of these people directly online, and was totally at a loss for, like, you know, they tell me I mischaracterized their politics, and I'm like, okay, but what's your politic? What is your politics? And I really didn't get an answer.
I mean, I had an altercation with somebody. Not altercation makes it sound too hostile, but somebody was replying in a thread I saw the other day with, like, you know, basically people complaining that Zoran is taking too much attention on the left. They're like, we need to learn the lessons of LA. And I just replied to them, like, what are the lessons of LA?
Right. What are they?
I'm open to learning the lessons. Like, I invite people to teach me the lessons of LA. I mean that 100% in all honesty, because obviously there's a problem with masked, you know, armed men stealing people off the street, and we can't, you know, in good conscience just allow that to go on unopposed. But I don't know what the lessons are. I don't, like, I've read about the Chaz Chop stuff from the George Floyd uprising, and I don't know what the lessons are. And I listened actually to Brunel recently, the same guy, Mathieu Brunel, who has a media called Lundi Matin, and one of their it's a French media, and they have a YouTube channel called Lundi Soir where they do interviews, and he talked about the Chop and Chaz, and it kind of shrugged, because, like, yeah, in America there's a lot of guns. So, like, what do you do about that?
Right.
I don't know. Like, I'm not sure where that's supposed to lead. And like, how do we make sense of the riot is an interesting question. I think rather than think about strike and riot as like that like it, I actually think Jasper talked about this on Antifada recently, where Jasper Barnes, when he was talking about his new book, where basically you can think about like a political circle around the point of production, where like the strike is like the central mode of struggle, and now we have an ellipse where there's like two centers. There's a center of the point of production, and then there's like the riot is the struggle on a different pole, right? And I guess like my response to that would be to say, why stop at 2 points? Why not draw a bigger graph, right, where more aspects of everyday life are drawn in, and understand the riot as a symptom of this people's era of like of the fact that the city is the locus of this particular material condition of urban life, and the threat that our life-giving networks are under. You see what I mean? Because to me, it's like the theory that I've been elaborating, and like, look, you can go. The book has been translated by David Broder. You can go read it if you want like more details. We didn't even talk today about the noosphere or like space time, or you know what I mean. There's a lot of stuff that we talk about in the theory that we could have, but like, I just see that theory as richer and kind of integrating the insights into it. You see what I mean? It's like a superset of insights, which leads to a politics that is maybe somebody like Jasper Barnes wouldn't support or wouldn't like or whatever. But I don't really know what else I can see. And look, like Derick, I'm a father, I have a job, I have a family to take care of, and a lot of people in that kind of context want to do something politically, and like above ground electoral organizing is relatively safe to do.
Right. Yeah.
And if you want to have a mass movement, I just don't know how you have a mass movement without doing it. Like, I can't imagine a mass movement in which we tell people that what happens with the laws and like the where the army goes and everything doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Because that's basically when you do electoral abstentionism, that's what you're saying is like the parliament and everything is completely spectacular and the real power is elsewhere. So where is the real power? Is it in the point of production? I would argue it is not. My workplace, like if I went on strike, what would that impact in the economy? I work at a Subway. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people in this. Am I off? Am I going too far?
No. This is actually a key point, because even if you assume that this is a point from communization that I actually think they're not wrong about, that like I've been pointing out, you guys are talking about you guys being Jacobin Magazine mostly, but a few other people, the rebirth of unions when you're talking about Starbucks unions. And yes, I believe that Starbucks workers deserve a union. I'm not some people who have some weird hang up about baristas with blue hair having employment rights, blah blah blah, something production that you might hear. But I also would like to point out that it's just not structurally the same as, I don't know, the entire iron industry or the steel workers union are.
Let's be specific. The dock workers have a choke point that the Starbucks workers do not have. That is not to denigrate the Starbucks workers. They're important. They matter. Like, morally, ethically, politically, they can be mobilized. They can do important things. But as just an objective fact, how are the Starbucks workers supposed to like prevent the shipment of arms to Israel?
Yeah, they're not. They can't really do that. Right. And
logistics, the people that work in tech, the people that work in logistics, these are the people that actually have like choke point influence, or choke point is the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Right. And these are people who have been relatively privileged in capitalist society compared to other workers for a long time, and that's ending. Like,
because I get, at the end of the day, like, I have an AC unit now. I didn't used to. I have one now. What happens when the electric goes out? And this is also where a lot of like left ideology bullshit, and I'm sorry if I keep jumping in to talk. I'm just really hyped. So please forgive me, Derek.
Yeah,
But like
it's okay.
when it comes to like the nuclear question, this is a big question in France. We have big nuclear. One of the reasons why the Unbowed are like anti-nuclear, but in a sort of progressive way, progressive meaning that it's like a progressive phase out, is because when like rivers get too hot, you can't use the water to cool the fucking reactors. So you have to just turn them off.
Yes, you're right.
And so it doesn't work, actually. It doesn't actually solve the problem. So like my AC unit allows me to have a comfortable job where I can be like in remote work. You know what I mean? I might have like a good position now, but if we don't do something about climate change, I won't.
Right.
And like that's the thing that's like, I think that's where like the eco-socialist orientation from the Unbowed, like I think that's just, if you don't have that, you're not doing anything worthwhile. Like, I'm sorry, you have to put that ecology has to be foundational because it's the biggest material condition change in our lifetime.
Absolutely. And I'm with you on that. This is something I think a lot about for a variety of reasons. And in America, you know, even the tech oligarchs are freaking out because they're going so hard against clean energy here that they're, you know, crushing red state jobs and endangering the AI revolution. They're all supporting, like, you know, AI revolution in quotation marks. But
and that's also something that like, is waiting for organizing. Like, I'm sorry, but like what's happening in Memphis is insane. All these data centers, this like AI slop. This is easy. Like, okay, easy is the wrong word, but this is an obvious place where people should be organizing. Like, do you want your water contaminated to produce the slop?
Right, for nothing. And do you want to have no energy? Because frankly, once they start cutting these green energy options out, what's going to happen is those AI things, which may not be as inefficient as I thought originally, but it doesn't matter if you're also shrinking the power grid at the same time, which effectively
even if they improve the AI power consumption, it's still making the whole energy situation worse.
Oh, absolutely. And so there are use cases for it where we could use it and make it better, but we're not doing that. We're just not. And so, like,
who has the right to build a data center? Like, that's a political question. Who owns the data center? Who controls it? Under what conditions operating, right?
Yeah, I will tell you something crazy because this affects my daily life here. I live in a place that, I shit you not, all right, has pushed, because of investment home building for effectively 2-person apartments, has pushed families of 3 and 4 out of the city into one area where there's literally 2 access roads. I'm not joking. So they're pushing families and the poor into the suburbs effectively. And in these suburbs, they want to build 3 or 4 data centers and a nuclear power plant. Henry, I live in the goddamn desert.
Yeah, it's nuts. This is nuts. And this is why, again, this is why a radical left movement is needed. Maybe people are going to listen to this and say, well, the Unbowed theory is interesting. Go get Melanchon's book, Now the People, from Verso. Read it. Let us know what you think. Maybe the form of the movement, the organizational form, is interesting because that could be deployed for maybe you don't give a shit about electoral politics, but the movement form is something kind of interesting. You know, these assemblies that federate, but there's still like a vertical structure to kind of keep things from getting too hairy. You know what I mean? Maybe that's interesting to people and they can take that and run with it. Great. Maybe the radical left part we've been talking about, the programmatism, is interesting to people. Great. Run with it, right? I'm not on your show to preach to people and tell them, you better do the Unbowed in America. But obviously, I think that it's very important and good, and there's a lot to learn from it. And I hope people learn things, right? Or take things away or think about things, because obviously there's a lot of work to be done, as you're saying. And I want people to be able to run campaigns and to, you know, politically organize in a way that's successful. I was recently criticized for being too evangelical about this. So I apologize if I was too evangelical about it with you. But, you know, I really appreciate you and the show and your time and everything. I hope it's clear that I'm saying all my critiques and mentioning everything I'm mentioning from a position of solidarity and support, right? Like, I want things to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
I would be happy if the socialist branding of DSA works. You know what I mean? That would be great. But I just don't know that it will.
Yeah, I mean, it would be awesome, but I think I just don't care about the branding at all anymore.
Yeah, I just giving one example. Like, maybe I don't know, maybe if people just apply themselves in the existing organizational structure, that it will work, and everything I've said about the form of the movement isn't necessary, right? That's possible, but I feel it's sort of incumbent upon me to translate and to transmit as much of these things as I can, because clearly there's a differential in terms of the amount of success, right? Like, and if we win in France, we're going to need solid, like, international solidarity. Otherwise, we're just going to get Allende'd. You know what I mean? We're going to need people to help us. So it's you can't build the people's revolution in only one country.
No, you cannot.
The citizens'
thank
revolution.
you so much. Yeah, the citizens' revolution in only one country. Thank you so much for coming on, Henry. Where can people find your work in English?
People should go to New International Magazine, newintermag.com. Contributor Derick C. Varn, or C. Derick Varn.
Yep. C. Derick Varn.
We're waiting for your review. When is your review of Jasper Byrne's book coming out?
We'll see. Actually, I'm reading the book right now for you to review it, because I do feel like there's been a substantive evolution in Jasper's thought, and this may be where I figure out where he's actually at now. From his interviews, I feel like I have hints, but no real answers. So I'm hoping this book, getting his specific understanding of what cancel communism was and why we should care about it, seems important to me. And I'm about halfway through it. I have some technical nitpicks here and there, but I'll tell you more when I write it.
Okay, sounds good. People can also listen to my podcast, which is not as frequent as yours, formspodcast.com. Forms, Forms.
Okay.
I have a blog at heliotage.com, but it's very infrequently updated, especially now that we have a new International. And obviously I'm on Twitter, Bluesky, Henry J.K. Wallis.
Okay,
yeah,
cool. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Derick. Thank you for your friendship and for this discussion. I hope it was productive and interesting for everybody.
It was for me. Thank you so much.
All right, ciao, ciao.